What do you know, Ben?
So here, breathe in and out.
Eddie's like my dad now. He's 81.
No, things are good.
You're a little old, a little early.
Oh, good.
Isn't that a song?
What's
a little
that?
old, a little early.
Breathe in, breathe out.
Thank you.
I'm more partial to you and tequila make me crazy. You know.
That works too.
I think it's officially 5:30, past 5:30. Welcome to a workshop with the Carver County Development Agency. We'll be discussing a potential project with them. And so let's begin. I think I turn it over to you or to Lori.
Yeah, the Community Development Director is going to give a brief PowerPoint. We do have Allison Strike, who's the Deputy Director of the CDA here, and she's going to be very involved in the conversation as well. The one thing I wanted to note is that tonight is the first workshop that is being televised on Mediacom Channel 8 and available for live streaming on Granicus. So we were able to get that implemented right away, and folks can watch this at home if they want
I'm
to.
glad I'm eating right in the middle of it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's jump in and talk about the CDA project a little bit. Just really quick, I know I gave a copy of the presentation to all of you, so if you want to flip through or kind of pause and reflect on any of the information that I'm going to cover, feel free to do so. Really, the intent tonight is just to provide you kind of an update of where the CDA is in evaluating a Victoria project, and also allow for the council to provide some direction and feedback to staff on working with the CDA moving forward. So I'll start with just a quick recap of primarily the information that the council on October 10th had reviewed. And then we'll kind of get into some key topics that either need some feedback for the CDA's benefit or for staff direction moving forward. One thing I just wanted to remind the council of, this slide really highlights kind of why the initial discussion with the CDA took place. The CDA over some period of time has been interested in doing a Victoria project, and as you might all recall, explored doing a project in collaboration with St. Victoria Church last year. That ended up not being financially feasible, and naturally the conversation went to talking about the city's property. But really kind of the emphasis of continuing this dialogue has been predicated on some key outcomes that the city's been looking for, and looking for senior housing options, and really looking for that diversity of housing in general throughout our community. On October 10th, we had talked about kind of where a possible landing spot might be for the CDA project on property owned by the city, the 13.5 acres over off of County Road 11 by Dairy Queen. Graphic on the right just generally identified a quick sketch of what the CDA's hired professionals had put together, showing a footprint of a 65-unit senior apartment building on that property, kind of related back to the city's downtown master plan for how connectivity and some of the infrastructure getting access to that property would be located, as well as some of those kind of high-level price points for what we thought the property would be valued at and what it would take to improve the property. The other thing we talked about kind of at a high-level standpoint on October 10th was really the idea that the CDA hadn't done enough evaluation at that point in time to know really what those financial impacts would be of how feasible the project would end up on this property. So some of the consideration of looking at city fees and whether or not some or portions of them would be things the city council would consider waiving to help make the project feasible. We had talked about pilot payments at that point in time, just as one source of revenue the CDA had identified as potentially being a mechanism to help make their project feasible. It also talked about building permit fees and parkland dedication based upon those 65 units that had been discussed at that point in time. One of the things I would say has evolved in the discussion since October 10th that staff and I think the CDA need a little bit more clarity on if the project is to move forward, is this idea of incorporating retail or some kind of commercial space into the project. What I would say, and Allison, feel free to chime in with anything different. I know that the CDA has in the past done commercial integration into projects. That typically works in the form of the city taking on the responsibility of either being the master leasee or finding a master leasee of that commercial component to see that function realized within the project. There are some benefits to seeing, say, one level or a portion of a floor being converted to retail, in that it helps to pay down the overall project costs for the CDA. Knowing that that has been a topic of conversation, we at least wanted to kind of pause here and get some reaction or feedback from the council on whether or not that's an element that the council would like to see with a final proposal, a final project. And if you have any questions about how that's worked in the past, I think this is a good opportunity to have that conversation with the CDA.
So, I think in general, a retail component seems like it could be very beneficial for the residents, assuming that those businesses would be the types of businesses that the residents would patronize. I mean, especially in this case where it's a little bit separated from the rest of the current business district in terms of walkability. Question I have with respect to who owns responsibility for it, and then where does the, in terms of reducing project cost to the CDA, if the city owns responsibility for being the master lessor, would there be a shared component in there that the city's contribution to the overall project could be offset somewhat by that retail piece as well, or our role as a master lessor, or having a stake in that?
Hi, Council. Again, I'm Allison Strike. I'm the Deputy Director with the CDA. After Julie and I have had much discussion around the retail piece, what we would like to see is that the city would, in fact, own that portion as a public entity and then be responsible for master leasing it. And so that's how Crossings at Town Center in Waconia, that's how that building is set up, and also Oak Grove in Norwood Young America.
Both of those, the city owns the retail portion?
Correct.
So does that then reduce the other elements? I think in the original packet, we talked about land and or money or bonding of some variety to have a more direct financial input. If the city purchases and owns, I guess, that piece of the structure, does that take the place of those other elements?
Well, do you have a slide going over what the cities have contributed in the past, because some of that will get answered. So if you look at like Norwood Young America and Waconia, the city still contributed in other ways besides owning the retail component.
So at this point, and I don't think I made it clear on the intro, is included in the staff report. One of the things that we're here we'll get to talking about is the overall deficit that the CDA has identified for this project, just in their financial outcome, roughly in that $2 million ballpark. Our assumption is the retail component is somewhat separate from the overall deficit. Really, that $2 million ballpark deficit is related to realizing a housing project that meets the affordability or income levels that the CDA typically operates their facilities on. So this is more, in terms of the commercial or retail component, really a dialogue of whether or not that element should be introduced into the project moving forward, more so that between the CDA and staff, we have some way to kind of reconcile, do we put more effort into finding a potential user or users of that space or not?
Correct. Our current gap does not factor in a retail component. So I think we are looking for more direction on the importance of that to the city.
I've heard both types of discussions. It seems to me that the retail component adds complexity, cost, and we need to separate it. Keep that separate for a second. How does the retail component have any impact on the economic viability of this project, either from the CDA point of view or the city's point of view? Because it seems to me that it's possible it has none. In other words, the ability of you to do this project probably has nothing to do with whether we put retail on the first floor. Is that true or false?
That could be accurate. I think without us trying to add, I mean, we'd have to add another floor, but if we're not going to own it, we have not factored in that what that does to our numbers. Not at this point, at any rate.
Yeah, I agree, the complexity piece, but I would want to does any part of the project, with or without retail, pay taxes?
We pay pilot in lieu of taxes. And sorry, go ahead.
I was say, can you characterize that in terms of dollars? Or how it would compare to a traditional property tax payment based on the value?
So maybe this, Allison, if you took the building that your office is in, the subway portion, they paid tax on their space.
Subway does, correct.
Correct.
Subway pays tax
So
on
the
their
retail
space.
portion would, and then the housing would pay the payment in lieu of tax.
Which we
That's purely
estimated.
voluntary, correct?
What's that?
Is that voluntary, that payment in lieu of taxes?
No.
Okay, so there's a,
We are required to pay it, but it is significantly less. Ballpark off the top of my head, I can't even think of what Brickyard pays in any given year, but it's significantly less.
We were estimating $45,000 a year would be the pilot payment on this size building.
Where otherwise it'd probably be closer to 150 to 170,000, something in that.
so it's somewhere in 25 to 35% of the normal, okay. Thanks, I mean, that's what I was looking for, some ballpark.
But the retail part would pay traditional property tax.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm truly interested in finding out if there is a retail part, hypothetically, what it's doing. Is it helping spread the overhead of the total project and the total startup costs? Is it helping or hindering or not affecting it? Because we're bringing in a whole element of complexity and cost, and we shouldn't bring it in if we don't have to.
I think some of that's going to depend on what would the city really be looking for. Are you talking about, like one store, or are we talking about a whole level of retail?
See, you enter into the area in my mind that is exactly why I'm uncomfortable with this. Is we don't have that expertise. We don't have staff to do that. It's just not. So my question was going to be: would we be free if we put the front end money in? Would we be free to sell that? You had made a note that you wanted the city to own it and act as the master lessor. Could we sell that and have another private entity that is expert in that area own it and be responsible for leasing it, and then we would just collect taxes as any other commercial property?
I can't speak for Julie, but I think some of her concern would be, and why it works so well to have the city master lease it at the other properties. Granted, who they have for retail is much different. They've got the library and a remote sheriff's location, so that's quite a bit different than where we have Subway in the building. I think what happens, part of it is the financing can be difficult when it's not owned by the city or by us. And what happens then, 5 or 10 years down the road, if there's somebody else owns it and maybe they lose their business or file bankruptcy, and then that piece is sitting vacant.
Okay, in
So-
my opinion, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In my opinion, the retail component is almost critical. I would hate to see this project move forward without that retail component. I really want to make this building into something special. It needs to be a gathering space for the entire community, a place for friends, family, and and the residents themselves to gather, and hopefully that some sort of a cafe, coffee shop at the very minimum. Ideally, the whole first floor would be retail. In our earlier discussions, this is the first I've heard of the city owning it. In our earlier discussions, we mentioned, or it was mentioned that a broker or a private party would own it, and then they would sublease it. I'm not sure if that is off the table, but to me that really makes sense. It would be a private broker owning it, and then they would then sublease it. Are there players out there that can do that from the get-go? I'd hate to see the city get involved in owning it. I'd much rather see a broker.
Excuse me, is the assumption here on this project that it would be in the 13.5 acres?
That's the current
I mean,
contemplation.
is that, then I have to raise a question, given the mayor's propensity for conflict of interest and Mr. Gregory's ownership of property in the same zoned area and the propensity to benefit from any development there, that Mr. Gregory should recuse himself from any discussion related to this.
I share that opinion. I know we don't have the city attorney here to render a legal opinion, but I think that's consistent, because there's a direct financial impact.
The city attorney and I have discussed that, as has Mr. Gregory, and like with all conflict of interest, sometimes it is more clear than others, and I can't evaluate for Councilmember Gregory what his financial interest in seeing the 13.5 acres is, and whether that renders a conflict of interest.
In that tone, if this project were to be a conflict of interest, essentially any project moving forward in the central business district would then be a conflict of interest. Is that your argument?
In the 13.5 acres, yes.
Well,
It's
not the 13,
undeveloped
but
because
we're talking central business district. This is zone central business district, so
I understand the zoning.
Okay.
I understand that your land is immediately adjacent to this 13.5 acres, but not.
what our home?
And business?
It's not, well, I mean.
It is zoned in the 13.5 acres, and I have to object, and
Well,
I'm sorry.
it's not part
If
of
we're
the
going to continue
13.5
this
acres.
conversation, there has to be no conflict of interest.
And it's not
period.
contiguous. I'm not sure how that.
I think if you look at the images, that your property is included in everything that we've called the 13.5 acres.
I would disagree on that.
I've been a member of the council for 6 years, and it's been included in every image. And so that's your call. You have the legal issue. I am raising my objection now,
Fair enough.
because if I owned the property there, you and the mayor would be coming after me right now. And so I would ask yourself to put yourself in the shoes to which you suggest that you're in, if I can say that properly. There is a conflict of interest here, and I register that as an objection.
Put me in an awkward position. We don't have a city attorney here.
You put yourself in the awkward position by discussing this. It's your decision.
It never even occurred to me, to be honest with you,
And
that I
you
would
know
have
what?
a
As a
conflict.
city council member, that should be the first thing on your mind.
Okay.
Wow. So, let's move on with the discussion.
I think we need to examine the whole project, not just the retail side. So we should make sure that in the time allotted, we have a discussion of the whole project and all the aspects of the financing and so on.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have to bring that up. Coming back to the things that I'm allowed to discuss, I am very much in favor of finding a way to work with CEA on a senior housing facility. My concern with respect to some of the ideas we have here are, we've overtly stated in the past that we're not good at developing from a business standpoint, and I'm hesitant to cross that line. If we were to find a partner that could do that, I would see that more preferable, but your point about financing is relevant and something that has to be taken into account. It is very clear that the citizens of Victoria want a senior housing facility, and I want to find a way to work with you guys.
Okay. Everyone generally on the same page?
I think so.
Yes.
So the other piece that's important, and I'm sorry, Allison, I don't have the project by project example.
Oh, that's fine.
But
I have it.
okay. One of the other things that was mentioned in the staff report for tonight's discussion item was the idea of additional financing. And we kind of talked this again at a very high level on October 10th, but now that we have more financial information, the CDA has identified the $2 million gap. I guess from staff and from CDA as they're evaluating the project moving forward, it kind of comes down to how bad do you want the project to happen in Victoria in terms of are we willing to help work on that gap. I think on the column on the left identified some ways that the city council could consider bridging portion of that gap, but interested in having that conversation if there are things like providing the land, waiving fees, partnering in some way through grant writing for grant opportunities that are out there for these types of projects. Just interested on kind of where the council is and comfort level on trying to participate in seeing that project come to fruition.
So just looking at the list of suggestions, land donation, possibly, and I'm speaking for myself. Use of existing city affordable housing funds, absolutely. I think that's a great use of that. City support in grant writing, absolutely. And then waiver of fees, I guess I would say that at least pieces of that could be on the table.
How much do we have in the Affordable Housing Fund?
180,000 presently.
Plus, do we still have a property that we're trying to sell to?
We do.
Okay. So
What property is that?
properties in,
It's in Lakebridge, in the
Orange.
Lakebridge
Right,
neighborhood.
yep, thank you.
so
Any-
we, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if there was any movement or anything on that, but that's a side project. Finish what you're.
I was going to say if it sold, so that'd put us at about 200,000, 250,000, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, we, timing-wise, will be accepting sealed bids for that property, but we wanted to wait until the spring building season before we start advertising that.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with Councilmember Striegel. I would like to see this project pursued. To me, land, as a personal opinion, land donation is not out of the question. Use of our affordable housing funds seems appropriate. I'd like to know what kind of grant writing is viable. I mean, is that realistic? That we potentially could capture some money through grant writing?
Yes. So Minnesota Housing's current RFP season they'll release all of that in April, and there are several different grants. One is the LHIA, Local Housing. Now I forget what the acronym stands for. That is a grant program, and that can be used as gap financing. There's an affordable housing program through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines that we're researching right now. There's challenge funds available through Minnesota Housing, so there are different options available through the RFP, this year's RFP process.
So what is the timeline on some of these grants?
So all the RFP information gets released in about mid-April. Everything will be due in mid-June. And typically, we find out in October to November whether or not we've been awarded funds.
And what is the range of funds that might be awarded?
You know, I'm not sure how high, like what's the max you can go on some of them. You know, last year we submitted a grant to Met Council, and that grant started out just shy of $400,000, and by the time we kind of dropped it down, it was in the $200,000 and some $1,000 range. I'm in the process of getting ready to go to our board with all this information in March, so I wish I knew better the upper side of those, but you know, anywhere from $100,000 up.
To finish off the discussion, I agree also that a waiver of some of the city fees should be considered. So I look at this as an opportunity that doesn't come along all the time. We're sitting in a pretty good position. We have a need. We have some property, and the economic environment is pretty healthy.
I think that's a good lead in into sort of the next point.
Yeah, just before you sit down, do you want to just give them, just for perspective, you want to give them a rundown of how some of the other projects had seen participation from cities?
Sure. So everything, our agency, the first property that we built was Lake Grace, and that's in Chaska. Everything that we have done since Lake Grace has required city participation on some level. So some examples are, we have Brickyard Apartments in Chaska, that's 32 units. The city provided the land for that building. They provided a $190,000 loan to finance the building permit fees and soil contamination remediation. And they have the underlying GO authority on that building. Jonathan Acres, which is also in Chaska, and that's 88 units. The city provided $1.5 million towards project costs, and that has a HUD-backed mortgage on it. Waconia, the Crossings at Town Center, which is 68 units. The total city investment in that project was $2.019 million. They have the underlying GO authority. They make an annual contribution of $35,000 for the life of the debt, and they purchased and donated the land for that site. Norwood Young America Oak Grove is 50 units. The city of Norwood Young America shared the pre-development costs for that building 50-50 with the CDA. They contributed $48,500 per year from 2010 until this year when we refinanced the building. And they have the underlying GO authority on that building. In Chanhassen, we have Centennial Hill, which is 65 units. The city contributed $400,000 to the debt service reserve. They have the underlying GO authority. We got a density bonus. They covered the building permit fees, and they contributed $31,000 annually from 1996 to 2004.
Excuse me for a second. What's a density bonus?
You maybe want to ask
So
one of them.
I'm guessing the base zoning didn't allow for the 65 units to be built on that property, so they probably, similar to probably our conditional use process, they allowed for the additional density on that parcel to take place.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand it as a financial component.
It wouldn't have, other than they just help provide the mechanism that allowed the project to move
Right.
forward.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Allison. So then lastly, I think as Allison alluded to earlier, the CDA will be evaluating this project among a number of other projects this coming year. Obviously, their staff has a limit to the number of projects that they can help to facilitate looking into, whether it's rehab projects, grant writing for new. I think even on October 10th, we had talked about the CDA also evaluating a Waconia project. So I think in the mix of kind of all of this evaluating being done by their group, it's not a certainty that they would elect to prioritize the Victoria project. So from city staff's perspective, I think we'd like some general feedback as to how you'd like staff to continue to dialogue with the CDA to either outline our interest in pursuing that partnership. If for some reason the CDA elected that of other priorities they didn't select Victoria, how would you like staff to proceed, either in looking at other potential partnerships from the private community, or kind of where you'd be in kind of solving for that affordable senior housing project in Victoria?
It remains a priority from my perspective. It has been a priority from the citizens of Victoria for a number of years. It continues to be, and I think it's something that we need to continue to look at very seriously to try to find a partner to move forward with a project. If the CDA chooses rightly so. They can prioritize as their business needs desire or require, and if they choose to go somewhere else, then I would want to find another partner to work with. I'd prefer to work with a CDA. We've looked at a number of different scenarios for development activities in the city of Victoria, and the way I think of this is call it the domino effect. We've got one domino that falls that leads to potentially 3 other dominoes that could fall, and I see this as one of those. And so really the start of the significant development with the apartment house across the street, that represents an opportunity to start looking at some changes in parking. Changes in parking allow for further development. Further development brings ability to invest in other development opportunities. So in my mind, we're putting together what dominoes have to fall in order for us to help the CDA achieve their vision. And I guess that's my direction to staff, is help us to put that picture together.
Any other comments?
I echo pretty much Councilmember Crowley's comments. I think, obviously this is a priority. It has been and will continue to be. We've got the citizen survey, documenting that statistically significant information that we use and we rely on to help guide our decisions. And I think CDA as a partner is my preference. The location, I think that's a good place on that land. I am less certain about the retail piece of it, and I really wouldn't want the city to be in that development landlord role of managing a building, et cetera, of commercial businesses. I would like to see that a retail piece be included if it helps the project be successful, but not strictly for forcing it for the purposes of having retail there. Kind of to Jim's point about dominoes, once you have, kind of bookended with the apartment project here and senior housing on the other end, I think that will, kind of organically generate demand for those retail businesses to come in and fill in that space in between. So I don't know that I think it has to be a part of this project per se. But if there's a commercially viable proposal that somebody wants put in front of us, I'm absolutely, supportive of it as long as it's market driven.
I share everything that's been said. Certainly would prefer to work with CDA if something could be worked out. I worry about missing out on the current grant season. The grant application season is coming up in the next couple of months, so it's key. If we have any kind of viable opportunity, we should seize it so we don't miss that. As far as the retail side of it is concerned, I still am not convinced there's any economic benefit to the project. We're going to have all kinds of retail. There's retail's possible in a building that's some property that's available near the daycare center. So I'm not too worried about retail. Everything else seems so plausible. We've got good land. We've got a good place for it, and so on and so forth. And we really would like to pursue something because of the economic momentum.
So I did want to just explain that I will be going to the board in March with a presentation of potential projects, so that if they so choose to prioritize Victoria as one of them, or they may decide we need to look at Waconia and Victoria, in which case maybe city staff would help with grant writing. But we are going in March in anticipation of having a decision made, so we do not miss the current grant cycle.
Does city staff have anything to say about assisting in grant writing?
We'd be happy to assist with grant writing. think we all recognize that getting a grant is an essential part to making this project happen. And we'd be happy to assist however we can.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I guess the only thing I'm just thinking in terms of financing options or financial contributions, I think some of the other projects you mentioned where the city was actually the lender of some piece of it, and I didn't see that on our list to actually.
I don't think the city has not historically been the lender, but they have contributed annual. They have had annual contributions to levy payments, but they've not acted as the lender.
Correct. Or they've been provided their underlying GO authority, and we've wrapped that into the county.
Yes. So providing GO authority for the city can help lower the interest rates that the CDA is able to provide, and we would contemplate that.
That's the kind of financing we discussed on our first meeting. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty viable.
Thank you.
Can I just recap a little bit? Thank you for the discussion. The things that we really wanted to overview, we've talked a lot about retail, and what I heard you say is you're not opposed to the idea of retail, but you're leery that the city would be the owner of that retail and that we would compete in that market. And also I heard a good understanding that retail, we've not yet identified a partner that would want to occupy that retail. So I think I heard an understanding that retail may not be feasible, and while we could continue to look at it and bring you options, you don't want to hold the project up for lack of retail.
Well said. Yes.
Well said.
And then as in terms of being a financial participant, I heard that the council understands at this point there is a financing gap that would require some level of city participation. You're not committing to any particular financing mechanism, but the type and range of amounts that we've thrown out are things that you're willing to consider should the CDA prioritize this project. Fair?
I think that's a fair assessment.
And then finally, I think what we would like to do is probably prepare a letter that Allison could take to the CDA board when she presents to them in March to encourage them to prioritize the Victoria project. Just so that we can directly convey that this is something we wanted to see happen for a long time for a variety of reasons. It hasn't yet come to fruition, but we would. The CDA is our preferred partner in senior housing. If it doesn't work out with the CDA for this year, then we might start to look into other options and wait until it's again, we're never going to rule the CDA out, but if they go forward with sort of different priorities for this year, we might look for other partners and wait until we can rise on their priority list.
I think the thing about the CDA that strikes me is they are a proven commodity here. Mm-hmm. They have facilities all around us, and they're successful facilities, and they're good facilities. So you can't beat that.
Yeah, well stated. And we've talked about that every time this has come up, but the CDA is a great partner. They own their facilities long term. They operate them at a high level. They take very good care of them. And they come at each project with that sort of community spirit in mind. So we've always known that we would like to work with them if it's possible.
Anything else that we need to cover? Any other comments from anyone? Allison, we really thank you for being here. Keep us in mind. Give us calls frequently so we don't lose touch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. The board meeting's on March 16. If you do want to submit a letter,
Perfect.
Something that you want me to provide to the board.
We will do that.
Is the board meeting open to the public? If somebody from the council wanted to attend just to be there and answer any questions if the board had them, is that an option for us?
Yes. Yep, they are open. So they are at 5. It is at 5:00, and it's at the CDA offices in Chaska.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. That's the extent of the workshop business, I take it.
Correct.
So we'll close the workshop and we'll resume at 6:30 for the council meeting.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Have you ever heard that? I haven't heard.
Your point is that
It's just an end around. It's like doing exactly.
To you guys to do things that shouldn't be in direction from you guys to the public.
Right, now we're acting as an agent of the government, directing.
And the way we talked about that being a problem is, let's say you have a variance coming, right, and you go out and try and gene up opposition, it becomes a problem.
If you don't, I am.
Looks like we're live, so you can go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Officially, we are about 2 minutes early.
Oh.
So I'm going to go by the, what's your cells?
I've got 6:29.
Okay, about a minute.
Brady Lee, he's a captain. He's also a full-time employee.
Nice. Stylish.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
All right, Tom, you're good to go.
I'd like to call the February 27th City Council meeting for the City of Victoria to order. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we move to the next item of agenda, City Manager would like to give us a message.
Thank you. As you'll note, the Mayor Pro Tem, Tom Vogt, Councilmember Vogt, is running the meeting this evening. Mayor Tom Funk asked me to relay to the City Council and members of the public that he had a vacation that was scheduled prior to declaring that he would be running for office that was unable to be rescheduled. So he regrets that he's not able to be here tonight, but he's sure we're in good hands with Councilmember Vogt. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Laurie.
Next order, in the next item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the open forum. The open forum is an opportunity for citizens to discuss with the council on items not on the agenda. If you wish to speak, you should have filled out a form and submitted it to someone up here. And we have no form, so at this point, it looks like no one would like to address us. We have someone? Okay, if you want to come to the lectern and state your name and address. Oh. It's okay.
She wanted to bring slides, but I said it wasn't
Hello, my name is Katie. Today I will be talking about why I think people should be allowed to raise their own chickens in Victoria. There are several reasons why people should be allowed to raise their own chickens. My first reason is because then we would have fresh eggs to eat. I have tasted fresh eggs and they taste really good, better than store-bought ones. My second reason for raising chickens is this way you know exactly what you are eating. From this store, you do not know if the chickens were sick, if they were fed antibiotics, what they were eating, or if they were cooped up. The happier and happier the chickens, the better tasting the eggs. My third reason for raising chickens is how do those eggs get to the store? In a truck. Trucks use engines, so that pollutes the air. That is not good for the environment. My fourth reason for raising chickens is that it is a good experience for both adults and children. It teaches them how to live without going to the store for everything, and it is fun for the children, and chickens can keep people company, even adults. Raising chickens are good for the environment, healthy, fun, and the eggs taste great. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Katie. So we have no other people signed up for the open forum. We'll end the open forum and begin the visitor presentations. First presentation is from the Victoria Fire Department.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So tonight we had a little scheduling conflict, so I wasn't able to bring you everything we were hoping to, but we'll give you a brief overview of what we were hoping to accomplish. So the first one is we were going to award an award to some of our firefighters tonight for a call that actually happened last fall, October 21st. It was a medical call in the city of Victoria. About 6 in the morning, we got called for, it came in as either a possible stroke or difficulty breathing. Upon arrival, I was the first one there, but we had a patient that was unresponsive, not breathing, no pulse. So CPR was started. It was declared a full arrest, so full cardiac arrest. CPR was started as the ambulance started to arrive, and subsequent rescue units, law enforcement. Our auto pulse device, which is a CPR machine, automated CPR machine, was applied. AED was used. We shocked the patient a couple of times. We were fortunate enough we got a pulse back at that point. So a cardiac instance like this, last year 350,000 people in this country died of that. The survival rates are like 12% without the use of an AED. So our survival rates jump to about 40% when an AED is involved. So a couple weeks ago I was contacted by the individual that was on the garage floor that morning. And that person has made a full recovery. So we had the opportunity to meet with that individual earlier this evening. She wanted to express her gratitude to everyone that was involved. So we got the firefighters, the paramedics from Ridgeview Ambulance there, and we were all able to meet with her. So really a cool outcome to a story that typically, unfortunately, doesn't always have that. And you have a 40% survival rate. I mean, it's awesome that we were able to get a pulse back, and that individual's with us today. So, any questions on that one?
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I just have to say, I mean, that's a true team effort, from the person that first started CPR to the AED to the medics, all the way down to the hospital. They ended up going downtown to the cath lab at Abbott, and I mean, it's a true team effort, but it's pretty neat that we're able to start that process and really help impact that life. So the other thing that we were going to do tonight is do what we call our black helmet presentation. We have 3 firefighters who were hired February 1st of last year, of 2016. Over the last year, they have completed all their mandatory training. 2 out of the 3 had to go through everything. The third individual is a 25-year member of Minneapolis Fire Department and actually serves as a battalion chief, so no training for him. He could basically jump right into the role. So what I wanted to highlight, though, was the time that these individuals spent over this first year to get there, and the sacrifice that not only they but their family made. The 2 individuals that had to do the full training jumped in a new pilot course that was offered last year through the state at Brainerd Lakes College. And what they did was about a 60-hour course online of all their firefighting skills. Once they completed that, they went to Camp Ripley for a week and started on a Sunday and finished on a Saturday, and did nonstop skills and drills and everything like that to apply what they learned online. So their days normally started at about 5:30 and went till about 11 o'clock at night. So it was a good opportunity for them. They didn't have to do the traditional firefighter training course, which can span 5 months, 2 nights a week. They were able to do a bunch of this stuff online at home and then go spend this week at Camp Ripley and knock it out and be done. So what we're doing tonight at the fire station for those individuals is they get their helmet presented to them with their shield on the front of it, and then also their family members come up and they get to choose who, but one of their family members will actually pin the badge on their uniform. So kind of a neat opportunity to get the family involved in that as well, and say thank you to them for the time that they sacrifice. So,
Chief, before you move on from that item, I can just comment. To be on the fire department takes a big time commitment, as you've highlighted. It takes a willingness to serve the community. What you don't need is to have a brother or an uncle or a cousin that's on the department. One of the things that we hear from residents is, I'd love to be on the fire department, but it's so hard to get on. And it is hard in terms of your time commitment and what you're going to need to give to be on the fire department. But I don't know if it ever was in Victoria, but it is certainly not the case that you have to know someone or be related to someone to get on the department. We've been doing great with recruiting, but we're still looking for people. And you need to live or work in Victoria and be willing to commit the time. That's it.
thank you. Then the last thing I wanted to cover tonight was their annual report for 2016, which I believe you should have in your packet. So I guess the first thing I kind of wanted to hit on is just a thank you to everyone on the department for all the time they put in. I'll get to some of the numbers here in a little bit, but it's a huge time commitment for these folks and the time that they put in to do so. On that first page, then, you'll kind of see a yearly call comparison. If you look over like the last 5 years, we're running about a 7% increase. In 2016, we finished at 278 calls for service, which is the most we've ever ran in the history of the department. So about 30 over the year prior to that. So 2017 has not started out that way at all. It's been probably the slowest start ever. So, I mean, that's a good thing. So, but the first of the year came around and a switch got flipped and something went different. So calls by month of service, obviously our summer months are traditionally busier than everything else just because people are out more active. Storms come through. Storms usually generate calls for us as well. So summer's a little bit busier. On the bottom of that first page, then you'll see the incident types. This is just kind of a breakdown of the type of calls we go on. As you can see, the majority of them are medical or rescue related, so there's about 57%. That does include car accidents in there and any other type of technical rescue type stuff. So if you take out the crashes and stuff like that, it drops it down to about 54%. I did pull some national data, and the national run volume, 2014 was the most current stuff they had, but about 64% were medicals. So we're running a little bit less than the medicals, than national average. So otherwise, you can see kind of all the other hazardous conditions are going to be like gas leaks, gas line cuts, stuff like that. 11% are fires, some sort of true fire. So whether it's a vehicle fire, a grass fire, an actual structure fire. A good portion of that 11% is made up of mutual aid fires. So on the next page then would be our breakdown by calls by hour of day. And some of that, what stands out is some of our busiest times can be the hardest to staff. So the kind of the noon to 3 p.m. are some of the peak times in there. I mean, our busiest is the evening right around dinner, but some of the higher numbers kind of run in that afternoon. So we've been very fortunate with our daytime. As Lori alluded to, our recruiting's been very well, and we've got some pretty good daytime response numbers. So that really helps offset that. So. The next one down, then you'll see the mutual aid report. We left the city 33 times last year for neighboring assists on calls, and that includes anything structure fire related. We spent a lot of time assisting with the search in Lake Waconia last fall. I think there was about 5 different instances in that. So that's what all that is made up of. The 12 times we received mutual aid, that was neighboring departments coming in to help us. So. As part of that mutual aid number as well, we do run what we call the life safety unit. It's a trailer that has some specialized equipment on it to staff firefighter rehab on these larger incidents. And we have one, and then there's another one out in Watertown. And that's kind of a good example of a shared service between the fire departments and the county. But we'll provide that on some scenes to assist with firefighter rehab. And I think that was 7 times last year, so that reflects in that number as well. So.
Chief?
Yes.
Obviously, we have a 5-year pattern here of anywhere from 3 to 1 to 6 to 1 times the aid given versus aid received. Does that ever balance out, or how does that?
I'm going to say no, because a lot of what drives those two numbers are two cities to the east of us that run triple the call volume. So just because of geographically where we're located, we're going to get pulled into more incidents because of that. So
The chief and I have talked about that, and it represents an incredible training opportunity as well. There are many times that we might go a year without having a structure fire in Victoria, which is awesome, and I'll root for that to keep up as long as it can. But it's not a good idea for our department not to go to a structure fire over the course of an entire year. And so many of the type of events that would summon mutual aid are beneficial for the department.
Thank you.
Then on the next page, you'll see calls for service. So we've 2012, 13, and 14, we kind of hit a low spot, and that's when our recruiting numbers were, our staffing numbers were down the lowest. We averaged 12 people per call. Over the last 2 years, 2015, 2016, we've started to see that number go up with our staffing that you can see there as well. So that's like I said, definitely helps us out in the daytime. We normal daytime we can be running 6 to 8 people, which is really good. Some cities are as low as 3 during the daytime, so that's really helped drive that average number up as well. Below that, you'll see our response time. So that's taken kind of a tumble over the last couple of years, which has been good. So 5.9 minutes, that's from the time we receive the call till the time we have someone on scene. So that could be people leaving dinner or whatever they're doing at home, going to the fire station, then getting in a truck and leaving there. So,
That's incredible.
So it's
How does
good.
that,
Yeah.
How does that compare, I mean, to our neighboring cities, to targets, national, whatever metrics you use?
Really the only national target out there, and I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe for our population, you would need a crew of 12 people there within 15 minutes, 80% of the time. And it's a random thing that NFPA threw out there. So, I mean, we're hitting that number. The other thing that really helps us is if we do have a large instance structure fire, we've got some auto aid assignments grouped in with that. So if we had a large structure fire, at the same time we get called, a neighboring department will get called as well. So we're sending multiple resources at it to get all those people there up front too. So.
Thank you.
So yeah, as I mentioned, that's people dropping whatever they're doing and running to the station and going from there. So below that, you'll just see incidents by the day of the week. So Wednesdays are busiest time of the year. I have no reason why, but just how the numbers worked out. So then on the back, just some highlights that I want to hit from the year. I was the only one that was awarded a service pin this year, so no one joined with me. We had a couple retirements in 2016, but Kevin Flindell and Doug Foote both served 2 years with the department. Doug served in a reserve firefighter role, so he was a firefighter on a neighboring department that would help us out when he was available. So the staffing, like I mentioned, is a high priority for us. This is the highest level we've been since 2010. So 2010, we had a full roster of 35 people. We're at 34 as of today. So
Is there an area of the day or time of the day that you need more help?
I mean, it's anything really daytime.
Okay.
We've been, like I said, we've been doing pretty well that we're 6 to 8 people during daytime calls, but it's so hard to predict who's going to be there when, if people are working at home and have to run off to a meeting or something like that. So 6 new firefighters were hired in 2016, so that was a big plus for us. We wrapped up 2 hiring processes, one of them just before Christmas. The 3 others that we hired the first of the year, the ones that I mentioned tonight, are getting their black helmets. So 11% increase in calls compared to 2015. Like I said, if you do about a 5-year average, it's a 7% increase. But we logged over 5,500 hours on calls, 3,200 hours in trainings, and then 535 hours on activities. So activities are community-type events, block parties, parades, anything like that, where we're out kind of doing connections with the community. So a ton of time that really reflects on the time that these folks are putting into this. So I guess the most important thing out of the 278 calls, no loss of life and no firefighters injured, which is great thing for us. Obviously, our conditions we work in are extremely dangerous at times, and to have no injuries, that's great. We did have one civilian that was injured in a fire last year, so nothing serious, but it was still a fire injury. So we had just shy of $2 million in property loss that occurred in the city last year. A small amount of that number is related to fire, about $436,000. The majority of it comes from, if you recall, last November out on Highway 7, there was a large load that was lost off a semi-trailer, and that's kind of our early estimates of what the property loss was that goes with that. So first time ever we held our open house on a Monday night instead of a Saturday like we've done in the past. It was a huge success internally as well. We had every single one of our firefighters there, which has probably never happened before. We train every single Monday night, so they're used to being there Monday nights. So it worked great. We're estimating we had 1,000 people attend that. So it's something we'll look at doing again this year. It was kind of a fluke that we ended up having to change it, but we actually had people that were working at the Ryder Cup that was in town that Saturday, and we had to staff some stuff there. So we decided to make the change. So financially, we did very well last year as far as grants and donations go. Some of the big ones are listed there, but we received $6,600 from the state of Minnesota for firefighter training. The Lions are very generous, as they always are, but just over $6,000 they donated to the department last year. $6,200 came from a Homeland Security grant through Carver County for some air monitoring equipment. And then just over $8,000 to cover the cost of a turnout gear washing machine, which is one of the big topics in the fire departments right now is cancer rates amongst firefighters. It's 66% higher than the general population because of all the carcinogens and stuff like that that we're exposed to in a fire. So these machines really help clean that gear thoroughly to get that stuff out of there, but extremely expensive. We have about a $900 match into this grant. The state's picking up the rest of that machine, so it was huge for us to get that. It's a great benefit to our people to help promote their health and safety. So that was a very fortunate one to get. I'll add one thing onto the last item here, because when I did this, I didn't know about tonight, but we had a pretty cool instance in the station last year. Just over a year ago, we had a baby that was born in the fire station. That individual was on the way to the hospital, decided she wasn't going to make it to the hospital, so the dispatcher said, pull over at the fire station, and they delivered a baby right on the floor there. About 2 weeks ago, we actually got together with that family and celebrated the first birthday of that baby now, so it's been already a year. But what I would like to add on to this is what I talked about earlier tonight was the cardiac arrest save. So that was a big positive for the year as well. So that's all I have. I'll take questions.
I have no questions. I'm in awe.
Is there anything that you attribute that 11%, the 30 increase of 30 calls year over year? Is there anything you attribute that to in general as a trend?
I'd say just probably the biggest contributing factor is the growing population. So we're going to just, as the population grows, we're going to continue to see that number climb. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Related to that, what keeps you up at night?
The staffing has really been what we've worked on the last couple of years and hit really hard. I'm not going to say we're content with it, because if we do that, then we're going to lose it. Really, what our goal is for the group, is we've set this out, is to really build that group now and get that tight-knit team, just because we have so many new faces, so many new people. So that's really kind of our goal going forward internally now, is that we build that group together. When we hire 6 people in a year, that's a huge undertaking for the entire department, not only bringing those 6 new people on, but the people that have been there now 10, 15 years have to get accustomed to it. So that's really our goal, is to work on that, to keep that tight-knit group together and focus kind of on that retention piece. And we've got all these people, let's not lose them. So
when I look at the statistic about 3,200 hours of training, and you've got 34 members, so nearly 100 hours per year per person, 2 hours every single week for every single person. I mean, that clearly illustrates the commitment of you and the team to the job, and also the challenge to doing the recruiting. A couple years ago, I guess Jim and I are probably the only ones left on the council. We made a substantial, I don't know, 20 or 25% increase in the pay rate for the paid on call for the firefighters. Has that been helpful? Does that make the job any easier in terms of getting people?
I'm going to say, honestly, most people don't look at that when they come in the door. It's the last thing on their mind. I think the folks really like it because it's some extra spending money when they get that check. But when they walk in the door, that's the last thing on their mind. They're there for different reasons. But I don't want to downplay it at all. I think it's something we need to continue to look at to be competitive with other cities. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but when you've got other cities not too far to the east of us that are paying $16, $17 an hour, and then you can go work scheduled shifts versus being paid on call. I think that'll kind of be one of the next big challenges we'll be looking at too. So,
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Identify yourself, please.
My name is John Day, and we came because the woman whose life you saved was a very dear friend of ours. Okay. And we just wanted to come and express our thanks for all you do, but especially that. And thank you. I know the training and everything you do, and the commitment of resources to your team is amazing. So we're very grateful. Thank you. Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Well, I'd like to have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to pull the minutes from the last council meeting.
Okay, we'll pull the minutes from the consent agenda. Anything else? I make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the adjustment of pulling the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
So, thank you. The reason I pulled the minutes was there were a few items that I have some questions about, and it's not so much that they're incorrect as they're maybe incomplete, and I wanted to, I guess, ask some questions about whether things should be included. The first is related to the claims roster from last month, and some comments that were made, and I wonder if they were related to legal fees, was the reason that was pulled, and those are legal fees that were paid to defend the council, as all cities do. And I wonder if the record should reflect that Mr. Gooby, who spoke first, is one of the plaintiffs in that legal action, and also that he works hand in glove and at the direction of Mr. Funk, and also that it was a significant exaggeration. He referenced $225,000 of legal fees being paid, and then identified checks totaling about $25,000. So I wanted to correct the record on that. And don't get me wrong, $25,000 is still a huge amount of money, but I didn't want it to be any more alarming than it already is. So I guess I'm asking that question. And then also if the record should reflect that the second gentleman who spoke was Mr. Funk's neighbor, and again, kind of working hand in hand in that direction. Those are the first couple points I wanted to ask.
Councilman Striegel, I think you raise good points. Those are not obligatory items that would need to be included in the minutes according to state statute, but if they are corrections or modifications that a majority of the council wishes for us to make, we can certainly make those.
Well, and I asked the question kind of in the context of generally there's some sort of resolution or some sort of summary that says, you know, from this discussion, this outcome, and so I think I'd like to see those footnotes made. And then kind of continuing on that same vein, my comments, my report to the council, where I requested that the mayor recant or rescind his request to his followers to reach him at his private email, and there was no kind of resolution. I'm wondering if the record should reflect that after being advised by the city attorney that it was a violation of city policy, that he indicated his intent to continue violating city policy, if that should be reflected in the record as well.
I think what we've tried to do, Councilman Striegel, is scale back the minutes largely over time. I always encourage those that are interested in understanding more detail about the conversations that happen. Obviously, the City Council has invested in the equipment that allows us to broadcast and make these videos available to the public. Certainly, you raised some points that I can understand they are definitely of interest to the public. And again, can incorporate changes to the minute if so desired, or we could note in the minutes for this evening that these issues have been raised so that they're part of the record.
Can I chime in? I think I agree with Councilmember Striegel that these are differences that are important, but I have a couple of questions. Am I correct that the minutes are the official record of the meeting as opposed to the video?
The minutes are the official record of the meeting. By state law, the things that they're required to include are records of any votes that are taken and who is attending the meeting. How detailed the city wants to be on discussions that occur is a discretionary matter. And like I said, we've really been trying to scale that back because the video is available for those that want to observe firsthand.
But when the minutes are the true record, legal record of the meeting, and the video and the two show a discrepancy?
So my understanding from previous conversations with the city attorney is that the minutes are the official record, but if you went to court, you could have the minutes modified according to the video. The video does still have some legal value. Is that fair?
Is there a legal requirement if we're recording the meeting? Can that just be the legal record, or are we obligated to have minutes also?
We are obligated to have minutes. They could be scaled way back. They could just include what the action items at each meeting were. Historically, we've talked about maintaining some brief level of minutes so that someone who wants to scan in a matter of minutes or look at a historical record has just a touch more. But we've been very clear that it's very difficult to capture every word that's said or the entire spirit of a discussion, and so we just try to keep the minutes at a high level. I'd almost call them a teaser. If you read the minutes and it's something that you feel intrigued by, then you should go and watch the video and observe that discussion.
Well, I guess, you know, again, consistent with past practice, generally, we don't capture all of the debate, but there is kind of a synopsis or a summary of the outcome, and that particular one ended kind of ambiguously. And now, as I'm rereading it again, I see also that there is an error that needs correcting, and that is that it states that Councilmember Crowley stated that the city policy is to use city email, and that advice actually came from the city attorney, not the council member. And so, I guess for my comfort level, I guess, that these do reflect the outcome of the discussion is that it show that the mayor intends to continue violating city policy. Pick whatever words you like, but I think the minutes should reflect that.
I agree, and thank you for catching that I didn't say that.
Is it, did I hear this correctly? City policy requires that we use the city email for city business?
City policy encourages city council members to use email for city business. We've talked extensively about the reasons for doing so. It makes it much easier for the city to comply with Data Practices Act requests. However, state law does not give the city the authority to require elected officials to use city email, but it is our preference that you would do so. Given the scope of the revisions, if I could just request that we would make the revisions and bring this back on a future agenda rather than try to write them on the spot, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be
think
fine.
Okay. Thank you.
For me, anyways. So do we need to make a motion related to, so I'll make a motion to table the minutes until the revisions can be captured and represented at the next meeting?
Thank you.
Second motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, the next order of business is donations.
I make a motion that we accept donations from the Victoria Fire Relief Association in the amount of $7,560.25, designation for the fire department, and turnout gear dryer.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next order of business is the public hearing and discussion of the 2017 street improvement project.
Thank you. The city engineer, Kara Guerin, is going to give a PowerPoint presentation, and she probably wants me to give her back the mouse.
Alrighty, good evening, acting mayor and council and members of the public. Tonight's topic for a public hearing is the 2017 street improvement project. This presentation was provided to the city council about a month ago, and a vast majority of the presentation was presented to residents at a neighborhood meeting in January. There's some additional detail or some modifications from what was presented at the neighborhood meeting, so I'll be sure to touch on that when that comes up. Just a little bit of history on the city's street capital improvement plan. It has been in process, underway on a somewhat annual basis, dating back since 2003 when the city adopted its current assessment policy. The first year of street improvements were completed in 2004, and in 2019 we will anticipate completion of all the improvements to streets currently identified for a significant capital improvement. The process for completing these projects is a 1 to 2 year process. It starts with the City Council authorizing a feasibility study, which occurred in December, I think it was. And the step that we're at tonight is we're holding the public improvement hearing. So if the City Council chooses, the Council would consider authorizing design tonight. We would move into the design phase of the project next. Some additional neighborhood meetings would occur. Once the construction plans are complete, the City Council would consider approving those plans and authorizing this solicitation of bids. Once the bids are received, the City Council then has to consider awarding a project. Then the improvements would be constructed next fall, and we'll go through this again at a later slide with a detailed schedule. But next fall, the City Council would order a final assessment hearing to be held. That hearing would be conducted, and then the City Council would approve the final assessments. After that point, assessments become due for payment or added to property taxes. And we'll cover that a little bit more later in this presentation. The streets that are included for the 2017 street improvement project are shown on this graphic here. It is a variety of streets throughout the city that we're considering for improvement in 2017. Included is the Swiss Mountain neighborhood, shown on the right, and Narcissus Court, Field Creek Circle, McKnight Circle, and then a portion of Virginia Drive, Cliffwood Circle, and Thornberry Curve, and Sunny Shadows up on the north part of the city. The existing conditions for the roads are, the pavement itself has past its useful life. The age of the streets varies from anywhere from 1985 to 1995 throughout the different project areas. The existing street widths are 28 feet wide, which is the city's current standard for streets. The section that exists for how it was built at the time it was built is a 9-inch section of Class 5, followed by 4.5 inches of asphalt. There's some geotextile fabric in some of the areas that would have been used to bridge poor soils back then. That was a typical method for trying to bridge areas with poor soils. None of these streets have drain tile. You can see by some of the pictures here that in many of the areas we're seeing pavement that's showing pretty good signs of deterioration. And there's some minor areas of cracked and settled curb. Generally, the curb is in fairly good shape for all of the project neighborhoods. The plan for all of these improvements is to improve the street section through a reclamation process. So for the council's benefit, this would be the similar type of improvement that was conducted in the Deer Run neighborhood last year. Essentially the same scope of improvements. So the existing pavement and Class 5 aggregate beneath the pavement would be reclaimed together to create a new base. We would be installing street drain tile in the roadway just inside of the curb. The purpose of this drain tile is to provide the ability for water to drain when it gets trapped underneath the roadway. So in the city of Victoria, we have heavy clay soils underneath all of our streets, which don't provide for very good drainage. So when you have cracks in the road and cracks in the curb, water can get down into the street section, and then it freezes in this clay, and you'll see the road start to heave, you'll see cracking, and you'll see potholes forming in those areas. So this drain tile system being installed is key to provide drainage for the roadway, which is significant for extending the life of the subgrade system. In addition to installing the drain tile, settled and cracked curb, as determined by my staff in the field, would be replaced as part of the project. It's important to note that this curb is not replaced for aesthetic reasons. It's only replaced if it's a place for water to pond in the roadway. So we run into that a lot as the project moves forward, where residents will contact us and say, but the curb's ugly and it's got a bunch of chips in it. We're not so concerned about that. If we tried to replace all of that curb and gutter, the project costs for both the city and for your assessments would be significantly higher than what you're seeing here in this presentation. In addition, because we're going to be excavating the roadway prior to completing the design, we would be assessing the sanitary sewer and water systems that are located within the roadway to determine if any repairs are needed before we construct a new surface. We also take a look at the storm sewer system. So typically we'll replace any castings in the catch basins. Those are the inlets that collect stormwater in the street. We want to make sure that those are adequate for getting water into the storm sewer system. So we'll look at making minor repairs as needed as part of these improvements. This is just a graphical depiction that shows what this reclaim process looks like. So in its existing road condition, there's road bed underneath the road. There's what we refer to as a subgrade. Then there's a base and bituminous surfacing. So when we bring in a reclaim equipment, which there's a picture of on a future slide, this existing surface is all ground up together to create a new base. Because this material expands as we grind it up, we do end up hauling some of the material off-site so that we can then install a new bituminous surface so we aren't dramatically increasing the height of the roadway. That can become problematic for getting in and out of your driveway if the elevations get too steep. These are just a few photos from the Deer Run project. This is an example of what the roadway looks like as the reclaim machine is coming through. This is a picture of the drain tile being installed in the road subgrade, and it's core drilled into the storm sewer. These are the castings and the rings that we look at replacing as part of the storm sewer system repairs. And then this picture shows the new asphalt being placed. It's a relatively low impact type of construction compared to what some of you have maybe noticed on 78th and Cochia this past year, where we had to do major improvements to the roadway and the road was closed to through traffic at all times. This is much lower impact. And for council members who live in the Deer Run neighborhood, they'd be able to speak to what that's like to live through. In the city of Victoria, 50% of the street and storm sewer costs for these improvements are assessed to the benefiting property owners. We use a lot unit method, so essentially every property that abuts the improvement will receive 1 unit assessment. That's different than some communities that will assess on a front foot basis. The city made this decision back in 2003 that for these residential type projects that are generally uniform in nature, each property owner pays the same for the road. So if you live on a corner lot, you would only be assessed for one of the 2 streets that you abut. Typically, we'll decide which one to have you get assessed on based on which way your driveway accesses the roadway. Assessments in Victoria for these types of improvements are levied over a 15-year period. The remaining half of the street and storm sewer costs are funded through general taxes that are collected by the city. Any of the sanitary sewer or water main improvements that we might identify are not assessed. Those are paid for using funds that are collected from your sewer and water bill that you pay every month or every 3 months, quarter. The total project cost for what we're planning to improve this year is a $1.2 million project. So this table depicts the total estimated project costs by area, the costs to be assessed, which would be 50% of the street and storm sewer. This math won't work out as exactly 50% because during the feasibility stage we did identify some of those sewer and water repairs, so those are included in the $1.2 million. And then the estimated unit assessment for each neighborhood is shown here. I'll walk through these a little again so you don't have to quickly try to find your street and memorize them as I flip through here quickly. But first, starting up in the Bay Cliff neighborhood, so this includes Thornberry Curve, Virginia Drive, and Cliffwood Circle. We're looking at $6,200 per unit. The Sunny Shadows neighborhood, up also on the northern limits of the city, is $5,800 per unit. Swiss Mountain, so that includes also Freiburg Court, in addition to all of the streets shown here. That assessment is working out to about $4,300 a unit. Narcissus Court is $4,200 per unit. And then when we get to Field Creek Circle and McKnight, we run into a little bit of a different situation on Field Creek. So this is one of the areas that was a place of discussion when we were at the neighborhood meeting. We, at that point in time, hadn't decided yet how we were going to be dealing with these multifamily units located at the end of Field Creek Circle. So what we ended up going through was we had the community development director, sitting to my right here, determine had this been platted consistently with the other units along here, there would have been 2 units of similar size as the neighbors here. So then we took those 2 units and allocated them to the 5 houses, 5 units. This is vacant. There isn't actually a building here, but the 5 buildings are sharing in the cost of those 2 units. So that's the basis of their calculation. What's, I think, important to note here that's unique for this project, for the City Council, is typically we haven't historically combined this diverse of projects into one year. I think the last time we probably did it might have been 2006. So the reason why all these assessment amounts vary is because the density of each of these neighborhoods is quite different. So up in the Bay Cliff neighborhood, these are much larger lots than the Field Creek Circle neighborhood. So there's less homes to share in the cost of the improvement. So that's why you're seeing a range in what those proposed assessments amounts are. So there's essentially less houses per street up here comparatively as you get down to Field Creek, which is the most dense neighborhood. So least amount of people sharing in the cost of the improvements. Residents do have the ability to defer special assessments based on the city's assessment policy. These deferments are available to property owned and occupied by persons 65 years of age or older or retired by virtue of a permanent and total disability whose sources of income do not exceed low income limits. It's a mouthful. If people are interested in learning more about that deferment process, that isn't something that gets addressed until the final assessment hearing, which doesn't happen until the improvements are complete. But you certainly could contact the city clerk to speak with her to get more information about what that process looks like and what those income limits are. Essentially, though, for those that qualify, the assessment would be deferred for a period of 15 years. The assessment does accrue interest under that deferment situation, and payment would become due if any of the items listed here were to occur. So in terms of the project schedule, we are here tonight on February 27th, looking at the public improvement hearing. After tonight's presentation, the City Council open the public hearing to provide the property owners in attendance an opportunity to address the council with any questions or concerns they have. After the public hearing is complete, the City Council could decide to send staff to make modifications to the project that's being considered, or the City Council could authorize design. So if they order the improvement and authorize preparation of plans and specs, we anticipate that that would occur over the next couple of months. During that time, we would have additional neighborhood meetings as necessary to talk through any specific concerns that neighbors have about the details of the proposed improvements. We've heard from at least one property owner with some questions about how some of the grades are going to be tied into an old project that had been completed in previous years that's going to interact with this project. So we'll be meeting with that property owner to specifically take a look at those issues during the design phase. The other thing that we're going to be working on in the design phase, so I didn't go through this in great detail tonight, but did at the neighborhood meeting. So with the drain tile that gets installed in the street, we will be providing drain tile service connections to each property owner for property owners to hook their sump pump line into the street. In getting feedback at the neighborhood meeting, it sounds like there's probably some areas with homes that have no need for those sump pump connections. So we're going to want to be working pretty closely with the neighbors during the design phase to make sure that we're only installing those where they're necessary to try to help reduce the project costs. So we'll be reaching out to you via mail, via door knocking, via whatever it takes to get information from you all about the need for those sump pump connections. There are areas within this project that have a great need for those sump pump connections. What we're trying to address is areas where you'll see water that's constantly draining to the street from people's yards. And you'll see signs of that by the presence of green slime in the summer, where that water is just constantly seeping out, and it's slippery and dangerous if people are walking on the street. In the winter, it'll be an area of ice patch because in many cases our sump pumps do run year-round. So our goal is going to be to get those connected to the street sump pump system to eliminate that water from the street. It's a very important piece because that sump pump discharge does cause significant deterioration to the roadway, so we want to make sure to get those addressed. But we also don't want to just put sump pump connections in everywhere, so we're going to want to be working with everyone to make sure that those are only going in where they're needed. And if you don't know whether you need one or not, my staff will be available to help you figure out whether you do or not. So a lot of that work would happen during the design phase over the next couple of months. Once that design work is complete, and this is a tentative schedule, if we end up tying up that design work sooner than May 22nd, we might be bringing that back to council before May 22nd, but we'll keep everyone informed of what the project timeline is via the city's project webpage that hopefully you've all signed up for. But preliminarily, we would receive contractor bids on June 29th of 2017. Construction would occur over the late summer months with completion scheduled for September 30th for substantial completion and final completion by October 21st. Once we have the final project costs, that would be the point that we would know the final assessment amount, and we would hold a final assessment hearing. Residents should anticipate that the assessment amount could be lower than what we've presented here tonight and what was listed in the mailing that you received at your house. If the project costs were to come in higher, the city council would have to start this whole process over. And in the years we've been doing this since 2004, I've never had a city council decide to start the process over. The thing to note about these, the costs we have to date, they are estimates, so they're based on historical costs for similar types of projects. So we weren't too sure what was going to happen with gas prices this year at the time we put together these estimates, so we did try to keep them a little bit on the high side. So we're hoping that when we get to bids, we'll be able to reduce the numbers that you're seeing today. And if these estimates assume everybody's getting a sump pump connection. So reducing the number of connections will also reduce the overall project cost. So that's the end of my presentation, unless the City Council has questions for me.
I have a question. The number, the total cost, does that include the sump pump connections?
It does.
It does. And what assumptions did you use in coming up with the number?
We assumed everyone was getting one.
Everyone.
Yeah.
So the number is definitely, from that perspective, a little bit high.
Correct. And I don't know if we have a sense. On the Deer Run project, we had assumed everybody would get them, and we ended up putting in significantly less than what we had originally assumed. But Deer Run, I think it's going to vary by neighborhood. I think that if I were to guess, let me go this way. I like these maps a little bit better. I don't think we'll see a lot of sump pump connections up in Bay Cliff and Sunny Shadows just based on the nature of the lots up there. They're large. They probably have their sump pumps, if they have them, discharging not right to the road. Swiss Mountain, there is a fair amount of sump pump discharge going to the street or across trails that we'll be working on. I'm not sure what percentage. Narcissus, it sounds like a lot of these people drain out to the back to the wetland complex. So, they're never going to replumb their house to run it out to the front. Right. So I could see those getting.
So these assessment numbers all include a component for the sump pump hookup?
Correct.
So by definition, everything else being equal, the numbers should go down if some people don't take the hookup.
Correct. The biggest wild card in the estimates is the effect of gas prices on bidding and what the bidding environment is like. And we won't be bidding until June. So if anyone can predict what's going to happen with oil and gas prices between now and then,
right,
let me know.
So there are unknowns and reasons to be conservative.
Yes.
I guess just a couple comments. First of all, being a resident of Deer Run, I was really impressed with the way this project went a year ago at this time when we were kind of at this phase in our neighborhood. From a cost standpoint, I think it was very attractive compared to some of the alternatives. I was also impressed with the speed that the actual pulverization process. My wife didn't even know they had ground up the road. She thought they had come by and spread dirt on top of it. It just went so fast. And the road was very usable during the process. So, I mean, if it rains a lot, it could change that, obviously. But in terms of kind of just the usability of it, it was really good. And then the quality of the outcome. I don't know if anybody wants to drive through Deer Run. I don't know if that is a statement about the contractor's quality of work or the process that you're using, but drive through the neighborhood. The smoothness, I mean, they just did a beautiful job of getting everything very leveled out, so there aren't big, you go over the manhole covers, and it's really a well done project. So the one suggestion that I will make is with respect to communication, and that is the curb and gutter work, especially where it abutted people's driveways. Some people got surprised and came out to leave and found a very large hole at the end of their driveway and had to drive across the lawn or make other arrangements to get out of their driveway. So figuring out a way to improve that would be my request. And then, conversely, I think anywhere if there's on-street, people are parking on the street next to a curb section that's planned for replacement, again, could be an issue. And I was happy to kind of hear your summary with respect to the sump pump connections. Again, that turned out to be the very pleasant surprise in our neighborhood in terms of the number of people that didn't need them and the cost that was taken out of the project by being selective in the way it was implemented. So I guess the last part is just a question, and that is, what is the remaining kind of resident communication look like? I mean, in terms of really making sure people have heard and understand the impact, is there anything you do differently from last time, or?
I would just note that we have added, over the years, we've had greatly improved communication ability via the city's website. So I'm going to take the opportunity to head to the city's website here quickly. If you go to Virtual City Hall and click on projects, this is where we are housing information relative to the various different road type projects that are going on in the city. But if you scroll down to the middle of the page here, you'll see a section on the 2017 Street and Drainage Improvement Project. Right here you can click to receive email updates, email or text updates if you want to hear from us via text. But if you click here, you can sign up specifically to be notified. So you just plug in your email address and you select which project you want to be notified on. You'll get a little email in your inbox that you need to confirm that you meant to sign up for this. But this is going to be our primary way of communicating with the public as the project goes forward. So we'll start to move away. You'll still get mailed invitations to any public meeting we're going to have. But as the project moves through the process, this becomes the primary way that we start to communicate. We do tell you when you're getting your last mailed notice and give you an opportunity to contact myself or my staff to let us know if you prefer mail notice. We'll still continue to mail you. Not everybody's on the internet. On 78th and Cochia, one of my coworkers just hand-delivered a notice whenever was necessary to the gal who lives on property that's still farmed over there. So we want to make sure that you get the information that you need in whatever way works for you. But I do think that, and certainly Councilmember Striegel can attest to it, I do think this became a pretty effective way to get information out. We try to not spam you with useless information, so we want you to have it. When we're sending you something, we want you to read it.
I thought this was actually, and I'm glad you brought it up, I completely forgot about it. Once a week, got an email that said, here's what you will expect this week, and it broke it down to where you could see your street and what was going to happen, and I thought that was great.
Other than that, because of the sump pump question, I think we'll probably look at doing a mailed survey to try to get some feedback from you on whether you have sump pumps. Amanda from my office, who's at the neighborhood meeting, is over there taking notes. She'll come to your door if she needs to try to get information from you. So that'll be ongoing should the council decide to move forward with the project.
Any discussion at this time by the council? Okay. Then we will open a public hearing to discuss this where people can come forward, state their comments. I would ask that before you begin talking that you identify yourself with your name and your address because we're being recorded. That's a reminder too. But so anyone is welcome to come forward and state their opinions or comments.
Do we need a motion to open the public hearing?
No.
Just come up to the podium if you would. Thank you.
My name's Wink Gay. I live at 7950 Narcissus Court. Our street, we have about 17 homes there, and of that, there's still 13 original owners there. One of the things when I bought my lot from the developer built the street to city specifications, and when it was all done, he turned it over to the city for ownership and for maintenance. Well, the maintenance has not been real good the last several years. The last time that street was seal coated, I believe, was 1997. Again, this street is 28 years old, so it's past its lifetime. But the last time I believe it was seal coated was 1997. Now, there's really no failures on our street. The street's in relatively good shape. All it needed was a minimal patchwork, and maybe been seal coated every 5 to 7 years as recommended. I believe that our street, first of all, doesn't need tile because all except one house is a walkout house. So we all drain either to the swamp or out in our yards, whatever. There's no drainage issues that I'm aware of anywhere. I believe that we could get by with just a mill and an overlay. Mill off 1.5 inches, put 1.5 inches back on again. There's some issues with the storm sewer. The inlets are not big enough at the bottom of the hill. They could be made larger. Fine, do that. That could come out of the $13 a quarter that we pay for the storm sewer fund. Another thing, if you're going to tag me with a $4,000 assessment, I want some proof why you need to do that. I want to see some core samples of the asphalt and tell me what's wrong with the asphalt, and some drill down the subsoil to see if there's any moisture. Really need this drain tile. To me, the asphalt has just dried out, has oxidized over the years. It's asphalt, it's past its lifetime. But because of a lack of maintenance, it's got deteriorated this far. And another thing, the state law, a lot of people you have to realize, in order to assess somebody, you have to show benefit to their property. Now, I cannot see any benefit to the improvement to Narcissus Court that benefits my property or anybody else's. And I wish you'd just do the maintenance, the mill and overlay instead of digging it up like they're saying. I don't see any advantage to doing that. None at all. And with this mill and overlay, that's a maintenance item where the city pays for it. We don't get assessed for that. And Mr. Gregory, I think you know me. I can speak to this subject. Thank you.
Anyone else with comments?
Hi, my name's Don Cantro. I live at 6405 Thornberry Curve. Our assessment's just a little slightly higher than that. I'm going to just say, I just want to reiterate some of those comments. I missed the first meeting. I travel a lot, and I wasn't available. But but I've seen nothing that says why this is being done. And part of our street, actually, this part of the street in front of our house is not being fixed because it was just reinstalled a few years ago. But same comments about the drain tiles. I don't think it's certainly on our street we need any hookups where it's all walkouts. Same deal. So sure like to see a realistic assessment as to what the issues are, why our street has had gravel and tar on it several times over the last several years as well. We have several new houses, so in the last 10 years. So I think our street's a little more updated than maybe some of the others. But if there's a genuine need, I'd love to see it. Love to see the assessment, and I'll say if I'm going to pay $6,000 or something, I'd like to know what I'm paying for at the end of the day. And you've done some work in my yard, put part of my driveway in. Wasn't so bad, but there's still a couple issues with that never got resolved either. So again, I'd like to understand what the whole context is and how it works. So, thank you.
Any further comments?
I'm not going to talk about chickens, though. 6357 Cliffwood Circle, Rick Crowell. We live on the cul-de-sac there, and we just don't have any traffic. I think if you put those crushed rocks, or I don't know what that is, over the top, it would be fine. But I don't know. I mean, we just don't have anywhere. There's 4 houses in the cul-de-sac, and we just don't get any traffic, and there's not much use there. And I think if you put that over, it should be fine. But like you say, if it's needed, I mean, then it's needed. But I think it should be something considered. Oh, a question too about the hookups. It won't affect us because I don't think anyone in our neighborhood will use them. But what does it cost for that, the sub pump hookups?
I don't have a number off the top of my head about
but
what
like,
it would
is
be
$100,
per house.
$1,000? I'm just curious. That's just for other people.
That's certainly information I can pull out, but I don't have it off the top of my head. The cost of the drain tile in the street is much more significant than the service connection to each lot. It's a relatively short piece of drain tile that gets installed compared to the drain tile in the street. And the drain tile in the street is necessary regardless of whether the sump pumps are draining there or not.
Are there any other comments? Sure. Can you come to the podium, please?
Is the whole project going to be drain tiled or only as it's needed? That's my question.
So city standard for all new streets in the city, so all the new development streets that get constructed, we put drain tile in all of our streets because of our clay soils. So we need to add drain tile to these streets so that we can prolong their life much longer than the 20 years that we've already gotten out of them. So there'll be a drain tile installed within the road adjacent to the curb,
I understand how it
regardless of the sump pump connections.
Yeah, I understand how that works. My question is, so for instance, part of our road was put in, when did the cul-de-sac go through? 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that?
2008.
Okay, so was there drain tile put in
Yes.
when that was put in?
Yep.
Okay, so.
Yeah,
It's possible
those-
that our street doesn't need a,
Those projects, what we did for the rest of the Bay Cliff neighborhood was a significantly more expensive improvement, so we reconstructed those streets fully. So those assessments were at least double what were proposed here. We put in a whole new sand section and new Class 5, and had to put curb in those areas. So much bigger project. So here, though, we're just proposing the drain tile and reclaiming and reusing the existing material to try to keep the cost down.
Anyone else?
Dave Beneke, 7985 Narcissus Court. Just a question on the drain tile. Our street has considerable slope to it. Is the need for the drain tile as a street that's perfectly flat?
Yes.
It is, okay. And then also, is there some reason why I would like to back Mr. Wink-Gay up, is we didn't have an overlay, or not an overlay, but any maintenance on that street for 20 years since, I've been there 25 years, and I believe it was 97 when there was some maintenance done on that street.
Our records indicate that it was seal coated last in 2006. So
Okay.
I was here at the time. I don't remember specifically being out there when we seal coated it, but we do keep an inventory now. So prior to the street project getting started, the street program getting started in 2003, what we're hearing from the residents on Narcissus Court is something that the previous city councils have heard from many of the neighborhoods that have reached that 20-year or older lifespan. So moving forward, as soon as streets are improved, they're immediately programmed for a seal coat, and then programmed for a second seal coat. And so you all see those coming through with routine maintenance approvals. So that same thing would happen, of course, here, that it would be programmed for a seal coat in year 7.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments?
I did get an answer from the back of the room. It looks like each stub is about $600 per stub.
Hello, my name's Darren Brooks. I live on 1430 Field Creek Circle. My first question is, do you know what year Field Creek Circle got the, the seal coating last?
I don't, but
That's okay. I thought maybe you might have that since you had the other information.
she texted it to me from the back of the room.
I think several of our neighbors like this idea. I mean, our road's been deteriorating quite a while, and that's why I wanted to know when that was. But one of the concerns I have is, hopefully there's record of this from the city, but about 5 years ago, perhaps in December, there was a big snowstorm, and I got home from a trip and noticed all this red fluid a little bit more towards the end of Field Creek Circle. So I called and found out that one of the trucks that came through lost all of its transmission fluid, I believe. So what happened is that of course, got pushed all over the street in the spring of the year. It was pretty heavy snowfall that year, and I had all this fluid all over the front of my yard. So I called the city and had them come out and kind of give me a hand. I'm like, what are we going to do here? Because I'm afraid that this is going to wreck the grass. And being particular about my lawn, they said come out. They came out, and it was so thick they used squeegees and stuff and water to try to get it off, and all went down. Well, as a result of that, I noticed right away the road started deteriorating quite a bit. And, it's still been that way. That's why I don't have the date, but hopefully it's recorded when that might have happened, and then when the last seal coating was. I don't believe it's been seal coated at all. We've had all kinds of potholes and stuff. And
Looks like 2006.
Yeah, it's been heavy on that end, working towards the middle. Which I'm at 1430. So, my concern is like there really should have been something that the city should have done in the way of tearing off just a half inch or an inch and a half or whatever is necessary and maybe coming back. So I don't know. Like I said, as a whole, some of my neighbors wanted me to speak on behalf of this being a good idea, but at the same time, it seems like the city should have had responsibility for some of the costs, because it seems for that area that we're ahead of most of the neighbors that got the roads, and I think it's a result of that drainage from all the fluid. So I guess what I'm asking ultimately is there's some financial responsibility that the city should take specifically for our street.
My name is Wolfgang Putscher, 6420 Thornbury Curve, and just wanted to state for the record, I think, Kara, you mentioned earlier we had a conversation about the road improvement that you showed on the map shows half of our property, and the other half is the prior improvement. And clearly, if we have $6,000 plus assessment, which I'm not having an issue with, but I'd like to make sure that at least it gets improved completely, and to the point that the whole property is covered continuously so that we don't have a crack right in the middle. And just want to make sure I can state this for a record.
This property was a unique property. For those who've maybe been around a while, this connection did not previously exist. So when we reconstructed the rest of the Bay Cliff neighborhood, we studied getting this connection in place and actually made the connection in a subsequent year after we were able to acquire the right-of-way from the adjacent property owners. So this gentleman that just spoke lives in this house, so he's halfway in and halfway out, so he has some concerns about how that connection gets made that we'll meet with him in the field to look at.
If I may.
Sure.
Is the portion that shows up there is white between the two blue sections, Virginia and Thornberry, that's been improved? That's
correct.
That's paved and, yeah.
Yep. And they weren't assessed for that improvement at the time. The properties that are included in this project.
Were not assessed.
Correct.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Public hearing is hereby closed.
Mayor, we will just, or Councilmember Vogt, we'll just take a quick motion for that, if you would.
Okay, that's,
I'll make a
sorry
motion
about
to
that.
close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Meeting's closed. The hearing is closed. So we'll have some discussion here in the council, with the council. Any comments?
Kira, help me understand. I know I'm kind of new to this, but this reclamation process is relatively new, but my understanding is much less expensive than complete reconstruction. When roads get deteriorated to a point where reclamation no longer works, then you have to do a complete reconstruction. So to get a better understanding of the condition on these roads, how far away are they from that point of no return?
Well, I think the place I want to start, and I did go relatively quickly through some of this stuff, that it probably would have been helpful if I paused a little bit more on the need part of the conversation. So you highlighted exactly what our job is, which is to find the right improvement at the right point in time. So seal coats are the least expensive, so that's people were talking about the rocks that we put down in the oil. That's the cheapest form of routine maintenance that we do, and we look at doing those at year 7 and year 14. We'll vary that depending on budget and depending on trying to group neighborhoods. But moving forward, since 2003, that's the schedule that we're on for streets that have been improved. What we look at then in deciding if the pavement can be seal coated is what the pavement condition is. And when you look at the pavement condition in many of these neighborhoods, we're seeing signs of what I refer to as alligator cracking. So when you're looking at the surface of the road, you'll see what looks like the skin of an alligator on that. And what that's showing me is that the subgrade beneath the road is shot. So if we seal coat it, or if the Public Works Department comes in and does some patching, those patches just pop out again. They've put a lot of time into Narcissus Court over the years, just doing some skin patches and patching different potholes, and you'll see those same areas will fail in subsequent years. And that's because the subgrade underneath the road is just shot. You've got these pounding trucks that have been garbage trucks and school buses and cars that have been pounding away on the road for the last 20 years. There reaches a point where there just isn't enough support underneath that surface to carry the load of those trucks. And so when we reach that point, we have to do something more significant. If we were to just come in and do a simple mill and overlay, all that cracking that you see right now in the road will reflect through within 1 to 3 years. We did some overlays in the Wintergreen neighborhood, and you could go over there and see some of the cracks that are coming through. That's to be expected. The beauty of the reclaim process is we're really doing something more substantial than just that routine mill and overlay, but it's way more cost effective than a complete reconstruction because we're trying to reuse the material that's there. The first reclaim that the City of Victoria did was in 2007 on Woodstone Drive in the Deer Run neighborhood. And we tried this alternative improvement because that road wasn't even that old at the time that we tackled that project, and it was in terrible shape. But the residents didn't want to have to pay to fully reconstruct it at, significantly more cost. You go and drive Woodstone Drive right now, and it's in really, really good condition. So by doing this type of improvement now, you're getting a much more cost-effective solution that with that drain tile in there. Now, again, this is a relatively newer type of improvement in the road building world. It's been going on for 20 years, but we operate in a 50-year window. Our goal is that we do this type of improvement now. We do 2 seal coats in year 7 and year 14, and then in year 20, we're just doing a basic mill and overlay that under the city's current policy is paid 100% with general tax dollars. The comments that were raised about the city needing to contribute to the cost of the project was essentially part of the reason why the city council decided that the assessment policy should be 50-50. That's why you have only 50% of the project costs assessed, not 100%. I got a little off track there, but did I answer your question? Feel free to repeat it.
But overlay costs are 100% the city's responsibility?
Under the city assessment policy, when a routine overlay is being completed on a road that was constructed properly in today's standards, 100% of the costs are paid by the city. I would not recommend a mill and overlay on any of these streets. It won't last. So that's why I'm not coming to you with that recommendation. The conditions have deteriorated behind that point. The other question you asked is how much worse do the streets have to get before they would warrant a complete reconstruction? We had quite a bit of discussion about that when the previous city council was debating whether they should defer the improvements for a period of 4 years. And it's just very difficult to predict that. We're operating on a pavement management curve, which I did not put in my presentation, but over time, the road's just going to get so poor that even the reclaim isn't going to be effective. Now, I'm not really in a position to say that's going to be in year 5. When we looked at it last year, I was of the opinion that if we push the projects out a few years, we probably could still do a reclaim on them. But the feedback that we got from many of the residents at that point in time was, sure, but in that time, the cost of gas, the cost of improvements is just going to go up. So it would just cost more due to inflation by waiting.
Do we have a feedback mechanism in place where each resident gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down or something to that effect?
Generally, that has not been a process that the city has undertaken with these types of projects. They're always very difficult decisions for the council to make. And based on my experience, there tends to be varying opinion among the neighborhoods about when's the right time. I don't know that I've really encountered anybody who wants to be assessed.
But Kara, if you go back in history to 2002, 2003, the city council was confronted with some astounding facts when the roads were examined. If I recall, I'm just repeating things I've read and heard said. If I recall, the city came to the conclusion that 60% of its roads and streets were defective and would fail sooner than expected. Is that something like that?
65% came to mind for me, but
65%.
Significant percentage.
At one point, prior to that, the city wasn't really managing their streets properly. The whole methodology has changed, and construction improvements were made, but they were confronted with 65% of the problem, and they set up this 12 or 15-year plan to make sure that all the streets were attended to properly in some kind of orderly sequence that made sense. And that's when this plan was put together, and this is an execution of a plan that was put in motion in 2003. And so basically, the idea that these reclamations cost so much, a total, what would you say if the cost of reclamation is X? What's the total if we had to rebuild all the streets? If we had to rebuild the streets from scratch because we let them go too far, is that double the cost of the reclamation, triple, or what?
At least that double to 2.5 times. I typically believe the number I've used is 2.5 times. We've done some comparative analysis. For the street reconstruction projects that we've done over the years, the assessments are significantly higher. So 78th and Cochia, for example, those unit assessments are about $11,000 per unit, if I remember correctly. So 2.5 times is the number that sticks in my head for the reconstruction. Obviously, that number is going to vary by the density of the neighborhood again. We had some that were, the Bay Cliff neighborhood assessments were really, really high.
So I've got about 5 points. I'm just going to make them quickly, and then if you may want to respond to a couple of them. First of all, and I think it's in some respects, it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? You think traffic on a road packs it down and makes it firmer and stronger, and so if you have to replace a little bit of asphalt on top, that's easy, but there's something going on underneath, and that maybe you want to spend a little bit of time talking about that a little bit. And kind of in conjunction with that is, what is the standard section of the city design standard today look like, and how does it compare, and why? And then I think the long-term, just for everyone's knowledge, there's a long-term street maintenance fund. Typically, we put anywhere from $75,000 to $150,000 a year into that fund, and that pays for mill and overlay, seal coating, crack sealing and seal coating, and that is 100% funded by general tax dollars. There's no assessments associated with those, and that is that program that Kara referred to in terms of maintaining the assets on a programmed, rational way to avoid them getting to this point of decline. And also maybe in terms of the design in the section, the design life of that versus what what some of the previous design lives were. And then lastly, it's not really the price of gas. Isn't it really the price of a barrel of oil, because it's asphalt, it's oil-based?
Well, there's just a lot of trucking, so the asphalt cost is impacted by oil, but then gas prices impact the cost of hauling the materials in and out. So both of them can have an effect.
Right. And then also to one of the resident comments about the value to the homeowner. So if you could talk a little bit about that process as well.
Sure. So I do think it is worthwhile to circle back to the roadway section. So the roads that were built in this 85 to 95 year range were built under what was the standard for road construction at the time in places like the city of Victoria. This 9 inches plus 4.5 inches of asphalt is pretty typical for roads that were constructed at this point in time. But the city started to already see major failures in some of those roads. Woodstone Drive is one of my examples. So in the late 90s, coming into the 2000s, the city standard for street construction changed significantly over what is the existing condition out there. So in addition to this drain tile on new roads, we remove 2 feet of soil underneath the asphalt and the Class 5. We haul 2 whole feet of material out of that poor heavy clay soils that, if any of you garden, have probably encountered in Victoria, and we replace that with sand. And so that sand layer is really important to provide for drainage. What we're doing here is really trying to accomplish a hybrid of that, because if we had to remove that material and bring the sand in, these assessments would be significantly higher for you. So we've decided to go down the route of this rehabilitation, reclaiming, reusing the material that's there, to really reduce your costs. So those roads that are built new in the city and the new developments, we expect to get 30 to 50 years out of them before we have to do anything major. These previous roads, 20 years was what we were hoping to get, and we're certainly past that, sitting in 2017 from where we were today. The reference to the state statute, so in general, the state statute refers to the fact that the amount of the assessment shouldn't exceed the increase in value, the benefit to the property. I'm looking at the city attorney to jump
Special
in.
benefit.
Thank you. It's the word I couldn't come up with. And so generally, we've gone through some special benefit testing with our assessment policy and found that our assessment policy at 50% generally is supported by that process. Was there anything else?
I think you covered all. Okay. Thank you. Well, I guess the question about why the roads are blowing up, and I mean, I'm just kind of leading.
Oh, right. There's a fabulous video that I could show everyone. But yeah, it's exactly the opposite of what everybody sees. You're only seeing the surface of the road. You're thinking it's asphalt, it should carry everything. But the surface is really only the surface. It's really what's happening down here in the existing road and what the subgrade and granular base is made up of. That's where the strength comes from to support those truckloads and those garbage truckloads. The bituminous surface is just this little bit on the top, but the whole street section is imperative. And under our new roads, we have sand all the way down through here. So we have a significant section to carry the load of those trucks before we hit the clay, which has no structural ability to carry load. You can see that if you have an opportunity to watch any of the construction happening in any of the new developments. You'll see trucks driving through that existing clay, and they all just sink right down because there's no strength in it. I'll happily post the fancy video to the website.
Any further discussion by the council?
Got to have something to say. I'm going to compliment Kara and her staff on the fine engineering work that they always do for the city. In general, I do not agree with the city's policy of assessing citizens for roads. I think if we had everything in a perfect world, we would have all the tax funds needed to cover this on behalf of the city or on behalf of the constituents. Something like 97% plus of our operating expenses are covered by property taxes, residential property taxes. And the only way to affect change is to deviate from that and try to spur commercial growth. And that takes a lot of work. Hold that thought. We have very high standards for roads. I had to drive to St. Paul 3 times back and forth this weekend. I can tell you the roads that are pictured here that we would consider to be in very bad condition are so far above what they have in St. Paul. Our standards are very high, and so there's some additional expense there. So when we look at 2003, a decision was made by a previous council to pursue this policy of building a higher standard of roads. We are not bound by those decisions, but we have, through past councils, previous councils, potentially this one, have decided to continue that work. Last year, for the first time, we started to look at a program to change this policy and change the mixture, delaying this project and potentially the remaining projects through 2019 to focus on development of commercial property so that we could start to affect that balance and try to bring in more commercial taxes to lessen the reliance upon residential taxes. Data point, $1 million in bond funding costs the city from a debt service standpoint between $60,000 and $70,000 a year. So when you look at what we have to fund from a city standpoint for these road reconstructions, it's approximately 20 years, a 20-year bond at $60,000 to $70,000 a year for every $1 million that we spend on a road. Now, if you go look at our bond service right now, a significant percentage of our free cash flow outside of the operating funds of the city is focused on paying for roads. We've painted ourselves into a corner because we have to pay for these roads. We have a high standard of roads. We can't spur development because we have no funds to spur commercial development because we're paying for roads. So it's a circular argument. So what we decided to pursue last year was the first time investigating delaying these road reclamations and looking at commercial development. And what surprised me, I'm hearing people here tonight that they don't want to be assessed. What surprised me is significant feedback that, no, we want to have our roads completed. So I'm kind of torn tonight. At one point in time, I heard that, we want to not pay for roads, but now I'm hearing that, or then we came back last year that we want to go ahead with this, and now I'm hearing tonight from a lot of people here that they don't want to do that. So that causes some confusion. So where does that leave me? Where does that leave you guys? If we want to affect the cost of roads and how we do that going forward, we have to get commercial development. And so it becomes a matter of time. When do you want to do that? So we can do that now, and we can put this off for another 2 or 3 years, and you can continue to live with the roads that you have now, or we can continue to complete that project or complete these projects through 2019 and put off commercial development until then. Personally, I think we need to, it's not all one way or another, but we need to start pursuing commercial development sooner rather than later. Based upon feedback I've heard previously, it sounds like we need to go forward with these roads. So if we look at the process that we have in place today, approving this going out to bid, let me ask it a different way. What's the process going forward, and at what point is an expenditure committed?
So the step that you're at right now is where I typically recommend you not move forward if you're not planning to move towards construction. The feasibility report phase is relatively inexpensive to complete the work that we've completed thus far. If we move into design, that's the point at which you're starting to expend significant dollars that you wouldn't have the money to pay for if you didn't move forward with bonding the project. Now, sometimes you might, who knows what's going to happen in the bidding environment. If really high bids came in for some reason, cities will sometimes decide, let's just stop and rebid this thing in a different bidding climate. But tonight, ordering the improvement is really the significant step in deciding to move forward or not move forward.
So earlier in the workshop tonight, before the council meeting started, we talked about the concept of all the different projects that the city could pursue as a series of dominoes. It's a matter of lining them up in the proper order to make sure the one trips the next one. And one of the dominoes that was just completed or is in the process of being completed is the apartment complex across the way. That trips another potential domino to fund parking in downtown Victoria. Something like $1.2 million worth of expenses to add a significant number of parking places, which we all know we need. All right, $1.2 million here, that pays for the parking too. Would you prefer to have a new road or would you prefer to have parking? That's the choice that we face here. Both are important, but I hear a lot of people say we need parking too. No? You don't want parking? Don't want the apartment building? That's a different question, but yeah, I understand. So just trying to lay out the decision process that we have to go through, or at least what I'm going through in my mind, and how to lay this out. I don't say I fully have an understanding of this. I don't have a decision on this. I have an understanding of what's going on, and I know what my preferences are, but I also understand that I'm here to represent you, and the last thing that I heard was we want to have better roads. So that's kind of where I stand.
Kara, kind of piggybacking on Jim's comments, when this plan was originally laid out in 2003, and I understand it was before your time, but there was a specific list, the inventory of roads that needed reconstruction, and I know we took a few years off when budgets were thin, but I think we're nearing the end. How many more construction cycles that we would have a project sort of this before we're done with this kind of getting everything to a reasonable standard?
2017 and 2018.
So this proposal plus one more year.
Correct.
Yes.
There's a handful of projects that I refer to as unplanned. So roads that need reconstruction but aren't specifically programmed because there's some other force at play. So there's a cul-de-sac where the property owners don't have sewer yet. We're not going to redo the street until they're ready for sewer. The costs for sewer were expensive. Their septic systems are all fine. So that's sitting on a shelf waiting for those neighbors to pursue it. Marsh Lake Road needs to be reconstructed. We're tracking that. We're working on that separate from this 2017, 2018 year type of projects. Steiger Lake Lane, running this way, needs to be reconstructed. That's going to be driven by downtown priorities. But these types of projects will be finished after one more round. And then every road in the city, except for these unplanned ones, will have had a capital improvement completed in it since we first undertook the project in 2003.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Just, first of all, I agree with Mr. Crowley's assessment of what we have to do. We do have to expand our tax base. We have to get beyond 97% residential. And that's going to enable us to do other things. Again, I'll repeat what I've said. We're at the tail end of this plan, and it was a good plan. It was thought out. It was the right thing to do. We should complete it. We should get this plan done, get these roads done. We took a breath about 6 months ago and said we'll probably try to defer some of these projects 3 or 4 years. And we got quite a bit of pushback from the neighborhoods when you start naming neighborhoods that aren't going to get their streets fixed. I did quite a bit of walking in Victoria in the campaign, and I walked Swiss Mountain, and I came to the conclusion there's no way these people shouldn't get new streets or get their streets fixed. But so I agree with everything Mr. Crowley said, but I also agree that we should continue and finish this plan. It was a good plan. It was well thought out. We've had discipline. We've done everything we said we were going to do. We should get it done.
To that point, I think a risk to delaying these projects means that could cost 2.5 times what it costs today. That's a big risk. That's a big chance to take.
So I hear I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To that, but then to dovetail on what Mr. Councilman Crowley had said, I'm just curious. We're doing a 50-50 cost. Does anybody know what neighboring cities are doing on this type of thing?
I'm looking at Lori to see if she knows what Chan does. Throughout the metro area, it varies. What did you say?
Chanhassen is a 40% resident assessment, 60% city. I think what Kara is going to say is throughout the metro, it varies from 0 to 100%, but we're very typical of the average.
Okay.
I think I heard I'll take a gamble that I heard a consensus. I'm just going to make a motion. We approve a resolution ordering improvement and the preparation of plans and specifications for the 2017 street and drainage improvements.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is discussion of possible land acquisition and joint park project with the MCWD.
We're going to kind of change focus here for a second, not talk about streets.
Still water, though.
Still water, yes. Before I get too far into kind of the explanation of why we're here tonight, just a little background just to kind of keep this topic in perspective for the council. In spring of 2015, the city and Minnehaha Creek Watershed District entered into a memorandum of understanding. At that point in time, the district in particular had put forth quite a bit of effort to kind of realign their focus to match kind of community-based goals, not just Victoria, but others that are within the district area. As part of the specific MOU with the city of Victoria, we outlined a number of different projects and areas of focus that were of interest both to the city and the district. One of those areas, for a number of reasons, but primarily because of the focus in development, was Wasserman Lake. Wasserman Lake, if you're not aware, is an impaired water. The city does have some responsibilities to correct that impairment. And I guess what we're getting to tonight is the district has identified an opportunity where acquiring property would lead both to a potential water quality benefit as well as a potential partnership where the city could realize a public park and potentially lake access adjacent to Wasserman Lake. Graphic before you here just identifies kind of on the right side, outlined in pink, property that is for sale. In total is about 32 acres. Of that 32-acre property, about 8 acres we're estimating is probably usable upland that could be used for park purposes. The real benefit here, aside from the park itself, is that there's quite a bit of pollutant loading that's been going into the lake, and through coordinated efforts both by the district, the city, as well as the Wasserman Lake Association, we've been doing CART monitoring over the years in the lake itself. However, the pond that's within this property here is an area that could serve to benefit in further improving the water quality of the lake. That's kind of the brunt of the reason the district has identified this property as a potential collaboration piece, just seeing that there could be some water quality benefits that they could help the city and the district realize for the better of Wasserman Lake. Really the intent tonight was to bring this proposal forward in concept, just to present you with this potential partnership. The district board of managers did have a meeting on the 23rd last week and did vote to enter into a purchase agreement for this property with the intent that they would work with staff and the city to put together a plan for how this property could be utilized. There would also be an evaluation just to determine what exactly is usable as park property here, with the caveat that their end goal, if they did proceed with closing on the property, is they'd want some form of an agreement with the city of Victoria where the city would, maybe not all at once, but would agree to acquire the usable area of property for a park. Throughout the course of evaluating that process, we basically go through that concept phase that I talked about, develop a concept that would be reviewed by the Park and Rec Committee, solicit additional feedback from the community, bring that concept forward with the council. Kind of the partnership piece of that would also be some cost analysis, both for the park area acquisition that could be the city's, as well as what elements could go into this type of a park to understand long-term capital improvement expenditures that would need to take place to realize that function of seeing a park developed on the property. We do have members of the Watershed District here. I'm sure they'd be happy to share kind of their perspective on the process, but interested to hear feedback from the council.
I have two questions. Go back to the map, please.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the gentleman from the Watershed District might be able to comment on this too. Number one, I'm all for improving the water quality of Wasserman Lake. My understanding is the development-ready site, the existing farm, is where most of the pollution, if not all the pollution, is coming from today. So question number one is, how can we truly affect the water quality without developing that site and removal of the farm? I mean, that's a harsh word, but that's essentially what we're talking about. So that's question number one. Can we make a difference without developing the site? And then question number two is, assuming we can, how do you measure that, and how long does it take to understand what benefit we're having?
Probably let James. That's getting a little more technical than I'm ready for.
Good evening, Council. James Whisker, Director of Planning, Minnehaha Creek. And Councilmember Crowley's question, if I got that right, your question's about the development-ready site and what sort of potential impact that has on the lake, and are we really, dealing with the issue at the right level? The farm across the road over a number of years, just based on typical agricultural practices, because it is a dairy farm and a feedlot, has runoff that's leaving the site from a couple different locations. Some of it comes south through that red wetland on the south end of the property, and historically some of it has come east. And in fact, the pond itself on the property, we've done some sediment cores and looked at the water quality in that wetland. And over time, the burden of loading from this general area, which is pretty significant when you look at Wasserman Lake, has shifted sort of from the farm site to this pond. That's to say that the pond itself is actually a nutrient pump. It's what's cranking out the phosphorus today. So it is probably the most strategic area for us to act. And obviously flavoring our decision-making is just what properties are available for sale, since we operate in a willing seller, willing buyer mode. And the property across the street has probably more sizable development potential. And when it does develop, the immediate loading or any issues from the farm that's there today will be mitigated through the development process. So
I'm sorry, question. Lacking that development, though, so if purchasing this land and we do something to that pond to affect the phosphorus coming off that means we're just going to have to continuously address that pond until that property develops. Is that correct?
The plan for the pond is to treat it with an aluminum product that settles out the nutrients and as well restore the wetlands on that property to reduce the loading that's coming from the site itself. There will be loading that's going to continue coming from this property, other properties, the developed properties, and downstream. But the principal issue for Wasserman Lake is inside the lake and from this particular wetland right now. Okay. Inside the lake, you have internal loading coming from the sediments, and that's exacerbated by carp. The Watershed District's piloted a 3-year program with the University of Minnesota to understand carp movement through this system all the way up to Pearson Lake, through Pearson, Marsh, and Wasserman. And the next steps, and some of the steps that have already been underway, are removing rough fish from Wasserman, alum dosing Wasserman Lake, and restoring this pond. And those are sort of the main things to do for Wasserman Lake to actually produce a measurable change in water clarity and water quality.
And what type of time frame? So from a measurement standpoint, when would you see an effect? Let's say we go forward with this year. How quick does an effect? Is it immediate? Is it a year?
Good question, Councilmember Crowley. And that's a question we get asked a lot, and our standard response is it's taken hundreds of years to get our lakes into the state that they're in, and it will take a long time, sizable investment, and a lot of partnership to actually see measurable response. The thing with Wasserman Lake is it's a reasonable percentage of the loading that's coming from this particular wetland, and it makes sense to address the landscape first. Once that's done, and we move into removing or managing more effectively the fish inside the lake, we'll be able to alum dose. And with those three things, the lake should respond more quickly than lakes that are much more driven by external loading. So if those things happen over the next 5 to 10 years, you would expect to see some measurable results in water clarity and water quality for Wasserman Lake. So that's the good news.
If you had magic wand, you could do anything you wanted to address the lake. Is this the first thing you do, or is there something else that you would rather do?
I think this is the first thing that you do. For the watershed district, given the size of the acquisition to the west, willing seller, willing buyer, and the fact that there's healthy development pressure in this area, the area's been stubbed out, and it will likely develop within the same time horizon as the district acting on this property, partnership with Victoria, and as well as in the lake. I think these are the right things to do. Of course, unfortunately, we're not blessed with magic wands. So
I understand. Thank you.
So there's two wetlands that are outlined in red here, one on the west and one on the south. And so I think what you had indicated was that those have, those are contaminated as well, but what is the flow from there? Are those contained, or do those eventually contribute as well?
It's hard to say, Councilmember Striegel, because when we do water quality monitoring, you're kind of working your way from inside of the lake out, trying to diagnose the specific source of pollutants, and you're checking for different times whether a wetland's flowing or not. But the runoff from the manure management that's applied to the farm, some of it does drain south into the wetland just south of the property line. So when you have wetlands that have been hydrologically altered and have received a lot of runoff from over years, they tend to become, instead of sinks for nutrients, they tend to actually pump nutrients out, and that's a pretty common phenomenon. Most of the wetlands in this area at one point or another have been altered and are probably actually contributing some load from the landscape to the lake. But our modeling and our monitoring indicate that this wetland to the west is the principal source of nutrients from this particular drainage area. The farm and the wetlands that receive runoff from the farm, mainly because it's an open pond. So there's been an awful lot of material that's maybe flowed through the site over time that's settled out there.
Okay, thank you. Is dredging or any other kind of more, active physical activity planned or possible to? I think that one side of Wasserman is very shallow and weedy, and it's almost looks like it's really filled with sediment. And I don't know if that's also a part of the farm runoff, but I'm curious about how long it'll keep generating phosphorus into the lake.
You mean actually within the lake? Dredging can be...
Or the ponds, for that matter, but anything that's contributing to it eventually or immediately.
So the principal restoration strategy that's considered for the property outlined in pink is vegetative hydrologic restoration of the wetland. So restoring how water works within the wetland and the plant community. Within the pond itself, our feasibility analysis are kind of indicating to us that alum dosing that pond is going to do the trick, and we want to be good stewards of public funds. So it doesn't look like dredging that pond will be necessary, but as we do more analysis through this due diligence phase under the purchase agreement that we have, we'd answer that question. That's something that we've asked our engineers to look at. Within the shallow area of Wasserman Lake, the littoral zones, that's generally what they're called, where you get a lot of the emergent vegetation people are docking out over. It's pretty common that you're going to get under a lake that has a lot of carp, you're going to have not a lot of plant material in that area, and you're going to get a lot of resuspension. So that's probably a natural phenomenon that's exacerbated by the carp. If we deal with that, you can expect a plant community come back in the shallow areas of the lake, which stop all of the sediment from being stirred back up and making the water column really cloudy. Dredging is used as a management practice if you have contaminants of concern, if there's real contamination, whether it's petroleums or heavy metals or those sorts of things that are bound to the sediment. Dredging can be used to clean those up. It's not something that we see a lot of unless there's those types of releases that are in the lake.
Just how impaired is the water in Wasserman?
Wasserman Lake exceeds state water quality standards by a substantial amount, and the City Council has identified that as your number one water priority, which is why we're out here working on it.
Isn't that the most impaired lake within our city?
I think Wasserman Lake is, in terms of fully developed lake, one of the most impaired lakes in the city, and that's one of the reasons that the city.
Is there a
council has
letter
identified
grade that you assigned to it?
The watershed district does have a grading program that it's looking at revisiting. This is going to rank D or F based on
D or F?
based on its water clarity and quality. Yes.
My recollection is that this was declared the most impaired water in Victoria. There was also a comment about city has some responsibility related to remediating it. Can you comment on why that is or what that is? Or
So under the city's MS4 permit, so our state mandated MS4 permit that I come and talk to you about generally once a year, we are legally obligated to address impaired waters that have what's an approved TMDL study completed on them. Wasserman has such a completed and adopted by the EPA TMDL study on it. So as part of that, we have an obligation to work on improving the water quality, and we have to report on that annually in our MS4 annual report that we submit every June. So part of this one's complicated enough that it isn't something that we would want to just be trying to address on our own. So we're very lucky that the Watershed District does bring expertise and resources to us on this problem, or it would be a little bit overwhelming for us, I think.
as I understand, this is also part of the Lake Minnetonka watershed, that eventually this flows down through the creek and enters Lake Minnetonka. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilmember Striegel. Wasserman Lake is near the headwaters. So Pearson flows into Marsh Lake, into Wasserman Lake, which then flows up into Auburn and then down into Parley Mud into Halstead Bay. And as the council's familiar with, that whole geography is so complicated, so resource rich, and undergoing a lot of transition with development and planned growth, that the Watershed District has established this as a priority focal area and is working in partnership with Carver County, the City of Victoria, Hennepin County, Minnetrista, St. Bonifacius, Laketown Township, Three Rivers, and some other partners to look at a whole systems approach and then tick off projects in a priority ranking that, as Mr. Landhauser outlined, match local community goals and achieve goals outside of water as well. And we're confident that by working in these types of partnerships, we're going to be able to leverage some outside funds to supplement our efforts.
Yeah, so one of the question marks coming into this that was in my head is, what does that big picture look like? And I think you've addressed that pretty well. And you may not always have an opportunity to do things in the perfect order, or it may not even be clear what the order is. You know, you get a chicken and egg situation. But as somebody once told me, when you end up with a chicken and egg situation, sometimes you just have to go out and buy a chicken, make your own eggs. So I don't know what the whole
talking a lot about chickens today.
Sorry. I was hoping nobody would notice. But so the eventual the desire for the city to eventually, or in stages, whatever, acquire the land as a recreational area, it's difficult to sign a blank check. So certainly as part of going forward with the investigation here, I'd want to have some understanding of how the price is set, when it's set, what the time horizon looks like for executing on it, that kind of information.
That would definitely be our goal. Part of it would be staff evaluating what kind of funding strategy can be used to pay off whatever portion is usable parkland, and then identifying what other partnership opportunities with this property both the district and city can participate in.
Is this otherwise developable for residential construction?
So the current listing, this property has been actively marketed for sale. Today it exists as 2 lots comprising the 32 acres. If you also recall, when the city installed the trunk sewer main over to the south side of Lake Washington, it went through a portion of this property. At that time, the city had installed 3 sanitary sewer stubs. So I think the intent and how the property's been marketed to date is that it could be up to 3 single-family residential units. really, if you step back and kind of think big picture, as Mr. Whisker had alluded to, we're running out of opportunities if the city was to grab another public access point for this lake around Wasserman. A lot of the other property has either been developed or has been preserved in more outlot configurations that don't really provide for that natural public access ability. So this being specifically, we're talking close to 8 acres of property. Could be a good gathering spot for things like a fishing pier that we don't currently see on the lake. We do have a DNR boat launch on the north side of the property, but that is also relatively small. So providing for additional ways to provide public access to this lake is at least why it stood out at a staff level to see this move forward for discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a general consensus. We really lean toward supporting this. I feel it's something. Wasserman is a travesty in terms of water quality. We can't let it get any worse, and we need to move forward. And the idea of having some extra parkland and some open space is good too.
I agree. If we're going to be the city of lakes and parks, we should try to take care of our lakes. So this seems to make sense. This looks like an opportunity that we should pursue.
Any further comments?
I wanted to just take a moment to thank the council for its leadership role in being a good steward of clean water and living your brand of lakes and parks, and for supporting this long-term strategic partnership with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, which I want to commend your staff on just doing a terrific job of sharing information and helping us put the pieces together. As you know, the district's approach has really evolved with the City of Victoria towards partnering to identify local community goals and bringing our water quality expertise to the table to help you accomplish clean water objectives, but help you accomplish them in ways that promote some of your other goals as a growing city. And we're really trying to creatively integrate clean water initiatives into infrastructure investments, whether that's roads, sewer, water, into planned development and into your parks and open spaces plans. And we think that that's a great way to go because it's the most cost-effective way and maximizes the public's return on the investment. And we've seen some immediate opportunities already start to percolate with the work that we're partnering on with regionally treating the water for your downtown, which we were able to partner on and leverage a couple $100,000 of Clean Water Legacy dollars recently. So I wanted to say thank you again. I think this is a great example. Obviously, there's some details to work out, and I look forward to being back in front of you with Ben and Kara and staff to outline what those details are.
So are you going to hang around for item 9A too?
I sure am.
We're not done yet.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Next order of business is the ordinance cleanup discussion. Who's leading this?
I'll take this one. I will be relatively brief on this, leave more time for feedback and input from the council. 3 primary focuses of discussion that I just wanted to bring before the council. I'd also had similar discussions with the Planning Commission at the meeting last week with them. As I'm sure the council can appreciate with one of the more recent projects, the Waterford Landing project, a lot of focus in kind of feedback that was received from the residents around the lake centered around how the notification process itself works. One of the things that staff has done is taken a look at, we do have that set distance of notification, particularly when we're dealing with planned unit developments of 600 feet to any property owner from kind of the boundary of the property being discussed. Where that starts to become problematic in the eyes of the general public is that particularly when you're developing property next to a lake, there's a community that probably resides around that lake, and 600 feet doesn't really capture people that are ultimately going to care about what happens adjacent to it. So one of the evaluation pieces that staff has taken a look at is how can we better inform people that care most about new development parcel projects. And one of those ways was really to take a look at keeping that measurement, because I think the 600 feet is appropriate to capture the people that are going to be most impacted, but not include in that distance measurement any public rights of way or public waters. So if you can imagine a project, just view the Waterford Landing property as an example, that 600-foot measurement would basically go outside of the lake. So anyone within 600 feet of the lake would have been notified with that project, with that proposal. Same could be said, we do run into similar instances, say around Highway 5 or Highway 7, when one property adjacent to the highway may be developing and there's property owners on the opposing side that maybe don't get reached just because of the width of that right-of-way. So removing that right-of-way from the equation is another way. Again, we're trying to provide that appropriate notification to people that are most impacted there. So the intent at this point, unless the council feels differently, is that staff would draft a revision to the current ordinance that has to do with the notification requirement just to exclude public rights of way and public waters. Any questions on that one? The next topic, supermajority vote of council on conditional use permits specific to PUDs. One of the unique aspects that, again, we were discussing with the Waterford Landing proposal was the city in its PUD ordinance calls for all approvals to be done as a supermajority vote, so a 4-to-1 vote in order for that conditional use permit allowing the PUD to move forward. What we've found at some research of our legal counsel is that another community recently been challenged with having a supermajority for similar types of actions. It's the opinion of our legal counsel that it would be in the city's best interest to remove that supermajority vote and simply be consistent with other conditional use permit practices in the city of just the majority vote to see action prevail.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
The attorney, could you explain a little bit further on that and what you found with what was the legal action that resulted in this recommendation?
Yeah, sure. So, Mayor and Council, the background on that is that, so we had an item a couple of items ago tonight. Kara gave a feasibility report. And then to move forward on that project or projects, you needed to have a supermajority vote. You needed to have a vote of 4 out of 5 council members. That's actually a supermajority requirement imposed by state statute. And there are other examples of that. There are other votes that you may take that require a supermajority vote. So we're talking about a different supermajority requirement. It's one that you, this city, have imposed on yourself. It's not one that the state legislature has imposed on you. And then, council member, to your point, the argument that's been made in a nearby city is that when a city does that, when a city imposes a supermajority vote requirement on itself that the legislature has not imposed, that the city is actually acting to limit landowner rights or limit resident rights in a way that the legislature hasn't mandated and, in fact, hasn't allowed. And so by doing that, by setting the bar higher than the legislature has set it, you are actually inhibiting development rights or whatever rights are at issue.
Legal liability.
It's a legal liability. And the other thing, and I will just tell you, I don't mean to be at all humorous about it, but if you really think through when a city imposes on itself something the legislature hasn't imposed, bear in mind that you can, by a 3-2 vote, always change your ordinances. So you impose by ordinance a supermajority requirement on yourself that you can undo with a 3-2 vote. So in some respects, it just doesn't make sense as a practical matter to do it, and why take the risk when that's the fact?
So I'm going to ask a question, open a can of worms, but we probably don't have to discuss this tonight. We've imposed other restrictions, and in particular, it's city manager's approval level is lower than what state statute requires. Should we address that? don't have to answer it tonight, but maybe we need to address that too.
In terms of action on the supermajority vote topic related to conditional use permits for PUDs, again, staff recommendation at this point is to simply revise the language in the PUD ordinance to remove that supermajority and stick with the simple majority vote. Third topic, again, brief, willing to go as far as the council wants to go on this. Construction activities. A topic that I would say is rather common for cities in similar circumstance to Victoria, where a lot of development activity is occurring, and now we're seeing development occurring in areas that maybe have been lacking or dormant in activity for some period of time. So we have new development going into more established neighborhoods. With that comes kind of the hours of operation that's typical to the construction industry. Outlined the hours that we currently allow for construction activities. So during the week, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., and then Saturday to Sunday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Staff has taken a number of questions, comments, concerns, complaints, if you will, for a regular period of time, I would say, over the past couple of years. It's not always consistent with the same development. It's more as a new home start happens across the street from someone that obviously isn't ready for that new development to take place. We typically get a call just asking when are those hours of operations. In some case, it's undoubtedly next to the household that just had a brand new baby and the baby just nodded off to sleep. So you have some frustration just in how do we deal with the development activities as they occur. In looking at how Victoria compares to other communities, I would say we're fairly equal in many aspects of what those hours are. There certainly are some communities, particularly on the weekends, that have less hours that they allow for construction activities. From a staff level, I don't know that me personally, I have an opinion of what's good, bad, or wrong with this. I generally say, while it's good to kind of take a look at construction activities when a new house is going up or a new subdivision is being constructed, I also try to keep in mind that if anyone on your neighborhood is interested in mowing their lawn, when's the reasonable time to consider that takes place? But also, particularly for the work week, anytime that you're leaving to go do your job, just assume that that's when the construction industry is trying to get to their job to build the house. So with that, I'd certainly take any direction from council if there's additional information you'd like to see or changes that you'd like to see explored.
I guess in general, I want to compliment staff for taking feedback from our citizens and coming back with recommendations to change the code to be more effective in terms of how we support them. So I think I support all these.
I think I support all of them too.
Yes, also.
9 o'clock during the week seems a little bit late, especially for families with small children, but that's just a thought.
Yeah, I definitely would say in practice you don't see a ton of construction happening over the winter months to that late in the evening. It's really more the summer or more seasonal months of the year that tends to take place. So people tend to also be out much later as well. Something that we could certainly take a look at if that's the desire of the council.
What's our flexibility? So, for example, if you had a development come before the planning commission and council, having ability to put some special conditions on that particular development if it's in a particularly sensitive area.
In all of our development agreements with new projects that come forward, we always spell out what those hours of operation are, either being identical to what the city code says, or if there are special circumstances, that's usually a topic of discussion with the developer if there's some special circumstances that would require modification to those hours.
But so it is a possibility. make that
Yes.
a condition.
And I think if there was certainly something that we were aware of that would be unique and different in the community, we would certainly want to look at that.
I'd just add that our construction contracts for city projects the cities undertakes are more restrictive than what's in there. So, because we're typically reconstructing neighborhood streets, so it's 7 to 7 Monday through Friday, and then 8 to 5 on Saturdays, and work is not allowed on holidays or Sundays without written permission from me, which I don't give without weigh-in from everyone else and the staff, but.
Thank you.
No further discussion. I think we addressed it.
Yes, thank you for your feedback. We'll see those items come back in a more formal manner in the future, but we want to have a little bit of discussion and receive some direction from the council.
Okay. Next order of business is the Schuts Lake Water Quality Initiatives. And there's a staff report.
Go ahead, Kara.
That would be me. But since the watershed district is here, maybe I'll just hang up my hat and let them talk. I think it's actually quite helpful that representatives from the district are here, but I think, do we have an aerial open? I think what I want to do is just talk about two different categories, I guess, related to Schuts Lake. So through the Waterford Landing project, the city council received pretty significant feedback about the condition of Schuts Lake. And I think it's kind of helpful to be talking about Schuts Lake on the same night that we talked about Wasserman, because we're kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum as it relates to lake quality. So Wasserman's already impaired. It's already on the state's impaired waters list. It already has a TMDL in place, and we already have obligations towards improving the water quality. I think the goal with Schuts Lake needs to be trying to not let it get there. So what can we do to improve the water quality in Schuts Lake so we don't end up in a Wasserman, because it's a lot more costly to clean up after the fact than before all the pollution ends up in the lake. So since the district is here, I'm going to let them talk about efforts related to how the district can be a resource to the residents. I consider us to be very lucky because the district is willing to bring a lot of resources to the city that if the city had to tackle some of these issues on its own, we wouldn't be able to afford to hire the expertise to help us have the analysis that they can bring to the table. And you could catch a flavor of that just by getting an opportunity to hear James describe the conditions in Wasserman. But specifically, as it relates to Schuts Lake, a lot of the land around the lake is private, but there are areas where the city does have infrastructure that is draining to Schuts Lake. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the Swiss Mountain neighborhood. The city council did authorize preparation of plans and specs. One of the first things that we'll want to do during the design phase is modify what was in our plan. A lot of water from this neighborhood drains down this road and into this pond here. One of the first things we want to do is we want to add a new storm sewer structure in the roadway that has a sump in it so that we can collect sediment off the road before it even gets into the stormwater pond. That's a pretty cost-effective add that we can add because we're going to have the road ripped up. So now would be the time to do that. So we'll proceed with that. And then we also talked about taking a look at this existing stormwater pond to see if there's an opportunity to do an enhancement to it. The council recalls the past discussion that the stormwater management rules that were in place when this development went into construction are not the same as what they are for the Waterford Landing proposal. So we should take a look at this stormwater pond to see if there's an opportunity to enhance it in any way, shape, or form to address water quality. We can do similar types of analysis to any other infrastructure that's draining to Schuts Lake. So the Madeline Creek system drains under Highway 5 and up through to Schuts Lake. And then the city also has a neighborhood over here that has storm sewer in place that discharges to the lake. There is already a sump structure that was installed in 2004 when these streets were reconstructed. But I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at all these systems and see if there's anything that could be done to improve the quality of the water entering the lake. I've talked with some of the Lake Association members about some of the conditions where this water flows through. So I'd like an opportunity to go walk this system with Public Works and with a representative or representatives from the Lake Association to take a look at what's happening there. Then we move on to the lake itself, and if James or Anna is willing to come and chat with us about the district's efforts related to Schutz Lake, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Kara. What exactly would you like to know?
So Anna and I have been talking about the diagnostic work that you all will be undertaking related to Schutz Lake to try to better understand the conditions. And, of course, your educational staff is of great benefit to us.
Sure. Well, the first thing that we like to say after we tell people, it took a long time for water bodies to get this dirty, it'll take a long time to clean them up, is the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District itself is very resource rich. We have over 120 lakes. And so there's no shortage of problems that need fixing. And one of the things that makes us successful is being able to focus. And in the short term, we have no immediate capital improvement plans for Schutz Lake. But we are going through our comprehensive plan update. And as part of that, we're mapping out in a simple to digest plan format, what are the issues for specific subwatersheds? What are driving those issues, and what are the basic management strategies that you would most readily apply, and roughly what might some of those cost? So that'll be our first opportunity to sort of roadmap a playbook of solutions for Schutz Lake. As Kara mentioned, in the meantime, we operate a water quality monitoring program. So once you know what's happening inside of the lake, you have to chase that upstream and into the tributaries and wetlands to figure out exactly what are the biggest actors on the lake. And Schutz Lake hovers around 43 to 49 micrograms per liter water quality, just under the state standards. So it's in the B to C grade range. And has been for a while. But in our last comprehensive plan, we did telegraph that development within the subwatershed, which is rather small and was planned, would be expected to increase the volumes of stormwater runoff as well as the pollutant loading that comes along with it. That's just a byproduct of developing our landscape. And when you increase the volume and pollutant loading, you're sending more things like phosphorus and total suspended sediments downstream. And the development further to the south of, I believe it's Highway 5, the sort of the Madeline Creek area, that area has developed quite a lot since our last comprehensive plan, 2005 to 2009, and there's still development happening out there. And it's likely that some of and it was developed under old rule scenarios that allowed more runoff than is typically allowed today in terms of pollutant loading. So that's probably the first place to start looking at opportunities for public investment and retrofit. Private development at the time wasn't held to the same standards as it is today. The other thing that our plan identified as a potential issue as that part of the watershed was to develop is just the conveyance system. It drains north under 5 through culverts and a series of interconnected channels. And usually when you start sending more runoff, you have the potential for erosion. So those are probably the first places to start looking for bank stabilization, making sure conveyance is sized appropriately, the culverts are sized appropriately. And then I think within the Madeline Creek neighborhood and the wetland complexes that everything drains to before it goes north, we could be looking at opportunities to retrofit some of those wetlands to treat the load that's going to Schutz Lake. And those would be some of your first protection strategies to keep the lake under state standards and at today's water quality. There's probably more than likely some issues within the lake. There's not many lakes out there that don't have carp or some level of internal loading issues, so that would be something else to look at, and something that our water quality monitoring program will be, as Kara mentioned, helping to diagnose, so we get a better sense of what's happening within the water body too.
So this topic really came to my attention as a result of the development project on Shuts Lake, and in doing investigations for that, had the opportunity to speak it. Actually, I think I may have spoken with you. It was a very interesting conversation, and thank you. Learned a lot, but taking the information from that conversation and then looking at the Google Earth map here, and then overlaying that with their neat little time travel. There are pictures in the summer all the way back to 1992 of the lake, and you can see the difference in the green algae around all the areas over time and how it's increased. And it grows significantly, and you look at those pictures on the two inlets on the south end, and where everyone has a lawn that goes right up to the lake. And so what I brought to staff, and thank you very much for bringing this back, is that we've got an opportunity here. We have a stormwater fund that we don't really know what to do with. We're waiting on regulations. I mean, and I'm oversimplifying it. Yeah, we could do a lot of things with it, but here is an opportunity where we could actually get in and try some things and gather some information, gather data, experiential data to say that, yes, we can have an effect, and here's how we can take this to other places within the city. And so I want to go find something here. I think there's something here that we can do to positively affect the lake for not a lot of money.
I have a question. The Madeline Creek pollution, or suspected pollution, is that overt? In other words, is it going under the highway and then draining right toward the lake? There's no, it's not being piped into the lake.
No, there's nothing overt, Councilmember Vogt. This is just what happens as humans develop the landscape. Yeah. So when the landscape's green and you have wetlands and we don't have things like roofs and driveways and streets and storm sewer conveying all that runoff, when it rains, that water's soaking into the ground and it's getting to the lake over a much longer period of time. When you develop the landscape and you put in a single-family subdivision with its streets and the roofs and the lawns, when it rains, the water comes off the lawn, off the roof, off the street, and it picks up whatever is around, and then that ends up in your storm sewer pipe underneath your road, and then that drains into a required stormwater management practice. So downstream of all these developments, within the development footprint, within the parcels that were developed, there were best management practices that were required to manage that stormwater ponds and those sorts of things. And this area developed under an older set of watershed standards. Today, most watershed standards require about the first inch of runoff from your landscape to actually be put back into the ground, which gets you close to a no degradation scenario. You're getting not a lot of runoff and not a lot of pollution coming off the landscape. Old regulatory standards allowed for some increase in pollutant loading. And some of you may or may not recall, I know Kara does because she sat for 4 years with me on a rulemaking task force that the district undertook, and it wasn't very popular at the time. But we spent 4 years and we upgraded our stormwater management regulations, I think much to the chagrin of some of our communities and the development community. They've panned out to be pretty effective and cost effective and not stymie development, and it's those standards that are in place today for all new development. But the stuff south of 5 developed quite some time ago, and some of it was under old standards.
We've had many discussions about stormwater ponds. I think we have, 32? 30?
80.
No, 38?
80.
80, okay.
30-80.
I'm rounding up.
I blew that one. We've got 80-some ponds, and I really would like creative ways to solve this problem and to start attacking it. But I don't share Mr. Crowley's thoughts that, we have a big amount of money that we might not know what to do with. I think we're underfunded in our stormwater funding because of the fact that we have taken caution instead of proactive funding. We've said we don't know what's going to happen, so let's hold back. But I agree that we should do something, but the stormwater pond issue is big with us. I think it's something we need to look at.
Right, and that's something through our comprehensive plan writing process as we meet with member communities and we take input that we've heard is a challenge for a lot of communities. Maintaining and the infrastructure that we've built, just as you heard earlier with the roads, is just as important as putting in the new infrastructure. So what we've heard with all of our communities that have successfully integrated stormwater management into the developed landscape over time is, how do we maintain these? After a certain point in time, they can actually become sources, and it's costly and time-consuming to go around maintaining them. So we should be looking at some of the stormwater facilities just to see what level of impact they do have. That's something that we did in partnership with the city when we did the Steger wetland restoration south of 5, is look at some of the facilities that were sort of old and legacy and if they needed maintenance. And there are things that you can do out in this part of Carver County with the tight clay soils to retrofit those stormwater ponds so that you sort of create a bench around the pond. It's what we're doing west of downtown Victoria with the expansion of your public facilities, is creating a bench that filters that water through the soil into drain tile. So you can actually increase the capacity of some of the facilities that we already have too. And those are some of the things that we can be looking at with the city after we get a better bead on what are the priority issues to address. You want to make sure that you're doing things in the right order and a first things first type of basis.
To the council member votes comment, I agree with you completely. I think our stormwater is underfunded, but my concern is, and I think we probably have the shared concern, is I don't know how much to fund it with. I don't know what problem we're trying to solve, and so experimenting gives us an idea as to what the possibilities are and perhaps how much we should be funding this.
You have a good point, but we should proceed with caution because
Yes.
I think we have 80-some ponds and we've got to get everything under control. It's going to cost money.
We will be scheduling a workshop here in the next couple of months specifically to talk with the current council at length about our stormwater ponds and the new swamp program that we have in place to help us prioritize how we're going to tackle dredging these things. So, but the pond enhancement that James was referencing for downtown is specifically something that I would like to take a look at for that Swiss Mountain Pond, because if we're going to be doing construction in the area, if we can combine that work into the scope of our project, now might be the time to do that.
And we'll have real data.
Right.
Does it have an effect?
Right.
Do we think that there's any agricultural runoff from the vineyards there?
That's a good question. It's fairly minimal. I mean, we're familiar with the Arboretum's management practices, and just across, I always forget what the north-south road is there, but in the northeast quadrant, you've got a large portion of the tributary drainage to Tamarack that's the vineyards, and then has some of the best water quality in the district.
So we should plant more vineyards.
Well, do you like wine?
Yes, we must. Your civic duty.
So I think all we were looking for tonight was just direction from council that this is something staff should be working on, the items that were noted. Any actual expenditure of any project would come back to the city council as part of our normal processes.
Agreed.
I think we agree.
I would do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you may come to the podium, please.
Okay, I'm Lance Fisher. I live at 6870 Rolling Acres Road on the north end of Schutz Lake, and I've been the president of the Schutz Lake Association for a number of years. And I would like to, first of all, comment that the development on the north end of the lake not only has stirred you guys up, but it stirred us up. That's how you got involved, I think, in the controversy, but it stirred us up in terms of the water quality in the lake, and we have a very strong push from most of the association members to do whatever we can to improve that water quality. And I wanted to comment on one thing, and that is I don't know if you know this, but I was actually involved with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for several years and acted as their president for 3. So I've got some background in this. One of the things we've noticed is that there is a tipping point when the water quality of the lake starts to noticeably degrade. It degrades at a much greater rate than it does in the years prior to that, where it's getting worse, but not a lot worse. It's not a very linear process.
It's exponential.
And I think we're right on that tipping point right now with Schutz Lake. So the time is now to strike. And I just want to make that point. Also, we're in the lake pretty convinced that we do indeed have a carp problem. We actually looked into funding a carp harvest ourselves, but it hasn't happened for a number of reasons. And I think there would be some interest in the Lake Association partnering with the city and the Watershed District to that end in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I think we've got concurrence that we should support this. Next item, reports from the city manager. Correspondence.
I just have a couple of brief items that were included in your packet under correspondence and a couple of things I wanted to highlight. As you know, we are looking for members for our comp plan steering committee. We're hoping to have a committee of 10 to 12 individuals. Some of those will be representatives of our existing committees, but we're looking for some that are not currently involved. We have 6 applications right now to serve on that committee. I would really love to see at least another handful of applicants. I wanted to make sure that people know, I think a lot of times there's a sense that somebody else will step up and do that, or we probably have an abundance of applications, and we really would like to see at least a couple of more people that are willing to serve on that comp plan steering committee. It is a big effort, but it has an enormous long-term impact on our community, and from people that have participated in the past, they've always noted that it's a very rewarding experience to be involved in the community that way. If there's someone that's thinking about participating but is not sure what that entails, or if their skill set is well suited for what we're looking for, Ben Landhauser, Aaron Smith, or I, or anyone on staff would be happy to talk you through sort of what serving on that committee looks like and what sort of backgrounds would be useful. As you know, the council will hold a special meeting next Monday night, March 6th, here in this room at 6:30, 6 o'clock, to hold interviews for that comp plan steering committee, and then they get their work started off almost right away at the middle to the end of March. So encourage anyone who is thinking about it to either seek us out or submit an application for the comp plan steering committee. Second item is that we have a new app. At our next council meeting, we will run through a demonstration of that, because if I hold up my phone right now, no one will be able to see anything. But I wanted to make sure that we start spreading the word. The council last year had committed some funds to developing an app, knowing that most of our residents are accessing our website and other information from some kind of a mobile device, be it your phone or an iPad or a Galaxy Tab. It's available both in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store for free. And it's just similar information that's available on our website, but easier to navigate on a mobile device. And then lastly, at the last meeting, we talked about the small cell wireless bill that is beginning to move through the House and Senate. The League of Minnesota Cities, the SRA, and individual cities that are very concerned about the potential impacts of that bill. There's been a lot of activity, but the current form of the bill is still very concerning to cities. And so there is the first House committee meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'm hoping to attend. I know Bob Vos is very involved, and a couple of our residents have sent some emails. So I just want to keep you apprised of what's going on with that. We'll continue to monitor the potential impacts to how cities can manage their right-of-way. Happy to take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, that's all I have for you tonight.
Any questions or discussion? There's none. Any reports from the attorney?
Pass, thank you.
I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I have one item I'd like to bring up.
Sure.
And I've mentioned it a couple times tonight as a part of our discussion, but I'd like to bring it up formally to state this for the citizens of Victoria, and that is that we have a tremendous staff for the city of Victoria. You've heard tonight a range of activities from water clarity to road reclamation to things that we've talked about in other meetings from a development standpoint, but the span of expertise of this small group of people is tremendous, and they're an important asset to our city. And I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ditto. Thank you.
Now I move we adjourn.
Great sentiment. Yes, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Well done, Mr. Pro Tem.